What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive from a betting perspective into all of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC Fight Night, Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov. Hopefully you'll find the information in this video useful, and if you do, I would really appreciate it if you could hit the like button on this video for me to push the video out to more people and to help my channel grow. And if you haven't subscribed already, please also subscribe, it would mean a lot. As many of you will know, I specialise in live betting on the UFC. As you can see, we have an amazing track record live betting on the UFC, dating all the way back to February 2016. So if you watch every UFC event live and you're interested in live betting on the UFC, check it out. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. If you want to know what to expect, you can find a video on the page that I will link to below, which basically shows you what the live betting service is like. So now let's get into breaking down the fights. So this weekend's card is taking place in Abu Dhabi, and whenever we've got UFC events that take place in different parts of the world, there are often certain X factors that can influence the outcome of a lot of matchups which wouldn't necessarily be present on an event in, say, the UFC Apex. So obviously very difficult fighting in the different fighting in the middle of a desert in Abu Dhabi as opposed to obviously fighting in the UFC Apex, or kind of a standard arena that the UFC would hold events in the United States most weeks. So whenever we have an event in a different part of the world, there's lots of things that can influence the outcome of fights. Sometimes we get a really hot and humid climate in the arena in places like some of the parts of Brazil, like Sao Paulo for example, and then you might get situations if there's events in like Denver or Mexico City where it's a high altitude climate. And then we might get situations in like Canada or the UK or Brazil where home advantage is very, very strong and it's very difficult to beat, fighters from that country or by decision in relatively close fights if you're fighting, or if you're from a different country, those fighters, right? We know home advantage is huge in combat sports. It's just the way it is. And one of the X factors that influences a lot of fight cards in this part of the world is that even though you don't have home advantage in a stereotypical sense, because obviously there aren't any fighters on this card from Abu Dhabi, we have seen a strong trend dating all the way back to UFC Fight Island when COVID was kicking off, of the judges on events that take place in this part of the world heavily favouring Muslim fighters. It is just a fact. It is a strong trend at this point. I live bet every single one of these events and I can tell you undeniably it is a strong trend, and I think there's a lot of brown envelopes floating around amongst MMA judges at the moment that are judging MMA promotion UFC events. And it isn't just events in Abu Dhabi, it's every UFC event. Judging is currently a joke. I'm not going to rant about it now, that's for another video on another day, but judging on events in Abu Dhabi is very, very biased towards Muslim fighters. And that's just the way it is. So I could go into like a 10-15 minute explanation as to why this is and why I believe this is, but I wouldn't do as good of a job of explaining what I think is going on as MMA Guru already has. He's done a fantastic job with this video. He's done a way better job of explaining this than I could. So you're much better off just going and watching his video. This is a fantastic video. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. And he gives some really solid examples with really good quality evidence of some pretty disgusting decisions in the UFC. Which I think are very, very difficult to argue against if you have eyeballs and a brain. And like I say, judges in this part of the world, in fact, judges on every UFC event have cost me tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars every year over the last few years with how bad their scoring of fights is. So yeah, watch Guru's video. He's done a brilliant job. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. He will do a much better job of talking about the problems with events in this part of the world than I can. So as we break down each of these fights, so that I don't keep repeating myself, it is just something to keep in mind. I'll just quickly reference it at the beginning of every breakdown that it's going to be very difficult for non-Muslim fighters to beat Muslim fighters on this card this weekend. That might upset some people might not believe it. For me, it is an undeniable fact and a very strong trend at this point. So Now let's get into the first fight on this card, which is going to be the main event between Cory Sandhagen and Umar Nurmagomedov. It's a fantastic fight, and we can kick things off by taking a look at the odds. So Nurmagomedov is one of the biggest favourites on the card at average odds of about 1.33, which is going to be minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. If we take a look at the odds on Sandhagen, he's around an average of 3.50, which is going to be plus 250 for an implied probability of 29%. So Sandhagen is 32 years old, 5'11", with a 70-inch reach, and Umar Nurmagomedov, 28 years old, 5'8", with a 69-inch reach, and he's also undefeated at 17-0, which is quite rare to see. There are not many fighters who rack up 17 professional fights without losing, and that just speaks to how good Umar Nurmagomedov is. He's a phenomenal fighter. He's absolutely brilliant, and I'm looking forward to his first real test in the UFC this weekend, because this is a big step up in competition for him, which we will talk about in this breakdown. But first we need to wrap up talking about the X factors in this fight. So both these guys are roughly the same age, not a massive age difference between the two, but we can see that Sandhagen is quite a bit longer and taller than Nurmagomedov. Both of them have about the same reach, but it'll be interesting to see how these two look at the weigh-ins on Friday night, because Nurmagomedov has got like a smaller, more compact body type, whereas Sandhagen is more lean and long. But I do really like Sandhagen's body type because he is abnormally long and tall for the division. At 5'11", he's absolutely huge for a bantamweight. But he's not one of like these lean, lanky, like physically weak guys in his division, that, you know, with a huge long neck and, you know, is pretty bad defensively, pretty slow to react to his opponents. He's not like a Sam Patterson. He is quite filled out, quite solid, and kind of suits his body type. So he's abnormally long and tall, but he doesn't really have any of the negative qualities associated with a fighter who is abnormally long and tall for the division. So it'll be interesting to see how big of a size advantage Sandhagen has on Friday night. He may not have much of a size advantage at all, but we'll have to wait until the ceremonial weigh-ins to find out. The only other X factor that I can think of on this fight, and it's one we've obviously touched on, you know, earlier in the video, and it is that Umar Nurmagomedov will have home advantage on his side for this fight, which means if it does go to a decision and a lot of the rounds are reasonably close, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for Sandhagen to win a decision this weekend. And that makes this an extra tough fight for Sandhagen, because Umar Nurmagomedov isn't going to be an easy fight for anyone. He is one of the best bantamweights in the world. You look at the lineage, you know, who he's related to, the team that he comes from. He's very well trained, he's very well rounded, he's a great striker, great grappler. Sandhagen has for sure got his hands full this weekend, but to be fair, skill for skill, I think Nurmagomedov could have his hands full as well, which is what makes this such an interesting fight. So before we get into breaking down how they match up from a technical point of view, I think it's really important to point out that this is a big step up in competition for Nurmagomedov. If you look at the guys that he's faced in the UFC so far, Sergey Morozov, you know, it was Morozov's debut. Brian Kelleher, obviously very, very old for the division. Nate Manners, no takedown offense and ground game. Ronnie Barcelos, almost 40 years old. And then he fought another debutant in Beksat Almakhan in his last fight. So Umar Nurmagomedov has never fought a top 15 fighter in the division. I mean, maybe Barcelos is on the fringes of the top 15, but I don't think any of these guys are in the top 15. They're certainly not in the top 10, and they're sure as hell not in the top 5. So Nurmagomedov is going from facing, you know, low-level fighters, you know, old fighters who are on steep declines, or debutants. He's going from fighting guys like that to suddenly fighting one of the best bantamweights on the planet, who's incredibly well-rounded and incredibly skilled. And, you know, a lot of the time, guys can get a little bit found out under those circumstances. Now, Nurmagomedov looks like an incredible fighter, and he's from a stable of fighters. He's from a gym. He's from a family of extremely high-level athletes, extremely high-level MMA fighters. And so if anyone is going to be able to go from facing, you know, these old declining fighters and debutants to taking on one of the best bantamweights in the world. It's going to be someone like Umar Nurmagomedov. And to be fair to Nurmagomedov, he is kind of walking a similar path to his teammates Khabib and Makhachev, because Makhachev and Khabib especially, they both had a lot of fights in the UFC before they started to really compete against those guys in the top 10, top 15. And then as soon as they did get a couple fights against the guys in the top 10, top 15, straight away they were thrust into the title picture. If you look at Makhachev, he went from fighting, Thiago Moises and Bobby Green to Charles Oliveira for a title shot very, very quickly. And we're likely going to see the same thing happen with Nurmagomedov if he beats Sandhagen. However, with Nurmagomedov, I really feel he's missed kind of like that stepping stone stage of his ascent to the title, where he's literally going from old declining fighters and debutants to one of the best bantamweights in the world. And it'll be interesting to see if he rises to the occasion, or if the step up in competition is a bit of a culture shock for him. He's looked phenomenal in his past fights, but Sandhagen is a whole new problem to deal with. And Sandhagen's an incredible fighter. I mean, even when you look at some of his highlight reel knockouts, his flash KOs of guys like Marlon Vera and Frankie Edgar, yes, these two fighters were older and they were declining, but at the same time we did see Nurmagomedov get dropped in the first round against a debutant in Al Makan. So, with how unorthodox and tricky of a striker Sandhagen is, this is a dangerous fight for Nurmagomedov, a very, very dangerous fight for him. So if we consider how both guys match up from a stylistic point of view, this is obviously predominantly and primarily a striker versus grappler matchup, but both these guys are way too good to put them in a box and pigeonhole them. They are far more than strikers and grapplers. They're extremely well-rounded mixed martial artists who are very highly skilled in all aspects of MMA. But for the context of this fight, Sandhagen obviously leans a lot more to striking, even though we have seen him use a lot of grappling in some of his recent fights, the Marlon Vera fight in particular. And of course Nurmagomedov, with the stable, the team that he comes from, is far more aligned to being a grappler. So in terms of how these two match up when it comes to striking, I've been really impressed by Nurmagomedov's striking, and at times in some of his past fights he's looked to be more of a striker than he's been a grappler. He's not like a Khabib that will just come out and wet blanket his opponents. He's a very well-rounded fighter with great footwork, great movement, fast hands. He's very, very technical. He throws a nice diverse range of strikes. I don't think he has the kind of killer edge to his striking that Sandhagen does. I think Nurmagomedov is one of these guys that is a little bit more of a point fighter that kind of just touches you, and he's very technical and he's got great technique, but he's not particularly dangerous on the feet, whereas Nurmagomedov can really hurt you with every, whereas Sandhagen can really hurt you with every limb on his body. Everything that he throws is with bad intentions. He'll throw knees, elbows on the inside, nasty combinations. He's a dynamic striker. He knows how to use his length. He throws a high volume of strikes, and he's got cardio for days. So on the feet, I have to give quite a big advantage to Cory Sandhagen, just because for me he is properly battle tested. We know this guy can go to war on the feet for 5 rounds, and it doesn't matter what you do to him. He's not going to tire out. He's not going to quit. He's just going to keep coming forward, and he's mean and he's nasty. Nurmagomedov's got great technique, and he can touch you and he can point fight. But Cory Sandhagen can drag you with him to the depths of hell, and he will thrive there because he's mean, he's nasty, and he's extremely skilled at what he does, but he does bring violence to the octagon. And this is one of the ways in which I think this fight could get very interesting. Nurmagomedov's fights up until this point have been relatively easy for him. Yes, he got dropped in the first round of his last fight against Al Makan, but what happens if Nurmagomedov eats a big elbow on the on the inside, or eats a big elbow from top position when he's kind of trying to hold Sandhagen down? What if Sandhagen catches him with a flying knee and breaks his nose or something? Sandhagen's very good at drawing guys into dogfights and inflicting a lot of damage. We saw how much damage he inflicted on Yadong Song. I know Nurmagomedov is a different fighter, but if Nurmagomedov drags him into, if Sandhagen drags him into the depths of hell, is Nurmagomedov battle-tested, tough enough, skilled enough, well-rounded enough to keep it together and still get the win. I'm not sure. We saw Poirier drag Islam Makhachev into a similar kind of fight. You know, in his last fight where he did inflict a lot of damage on Makhachev, Makhachev was able to get the job done. But no disrespect to Dustin, but Dustin is a 36-year-old lightweight with a lot of miles on the clock, has taken a lot of damage, and I don't think it was that impressive actually how close and competitive that fight was in the end. You would have expected that night's work to be much easier for Makhachev. Nurmagomedov has got a far tougher test in front of him in Sandhagen, who is legitimately one of the best guys in the division in his absolute prime. Not like Poirier, who's still kind of hanging on to the top rankings because of everything he's achieved in his career, but he's probably not a top tier lightweight anymore simply because of the stage of his career he is in, with how many miles he's got on the clock and the fact he's entering that stage of in his career where he'll be declining now. He's a big name, yes, he's achieved a lot, yes, but Sandhagen's a whole new set of challenges on a different level of difficulty, right? This is probably insane mode in a video game facing someone like Sandhagen. So on the feet, I would definitely favour Sandhagen here. Now, when it comes to grappling, it would take a foolish man to bet against someone with the surname Nurmagomedov when it comes to MMA grappling, because obviously Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of the greatest fighters of all time. I personally believe he probably is the greatest fighter of all time. And so Nurmagomedov probably has a decent advantage on the ground over Sandhagen here. But what I will say is we don't have conclusive evidence that Nurmagomedov will actually be able to use his grappling in this fight, because we don't really have much footage available of Cory Sandhagen's takedown defense and ground game in the last few years. We haven't really seen Sandhagen fight any strong grapplers, certainly not the level of grappler that Nurmagomedov is. Therefore, it is difficult to gauge how good of a job Sandhagen is going to be able to do at keeping this fight standing. We've already said Sandhagen likely has the advantage on the feet, so if he can keep the majority of the fight on the feet, he's probably going to do pretty well. But because we haven't got good quality footage on Sandhagen's takedown defense and ground game against a very, very high level grappler like Nurmagomedov, we don't really know what the chances of Sandhagen keeping this fight standing are. You know, people will point to the Aljamain Sterling fight where he basically got ragdolled and choked unconscious, but for me personally, a fight that only lasted a minute and a half 4 years ago doesn't really tell me anything. Sandhagen could have improved a lot since then, and he probably just got caught flat-footed and cold in a bad position, and you know, was in too bad of a position to get out of before he had the chance to defend himself. It is what it is. And if you look at his recent opponents, obviously 2 quick wins here. You know, Peter Yan's a striker, Yadong Song's a striker, Marlon Vera is a striker, Rob Font is a striker. So he hasn't faced any grapplers in the last sort of 3 years. The last time we saw any glimpse of Sandhagen's defensive wrestling and takedown defense was his fight, you know, 3 years ago, almost to the day actually, almost to the day, 1 week out. Yeah, last time we saw his takedown offense was against TJ Dillashaw all the way back in 2021. And to be fair, his takedown offense looked pretty good. And obviously TJ Dillashaw is a good MMA grappler and quite a strong wrestler. The problem with using this fight to gauge Sandhagen's chances of neutralizing the threat of Nurmagomedov's MMA grappling is that Dillashaw didn't commit too hard to the grappling in this fight, and at the same time has a very different style of grappling to Umar Nurmagomedov. So Umar Nurmagomedov is the type of grappler that understands the importance of position over submission. He has a decent amount of physicality to his grappling, and he looks to stick to you like glue, never lets you off the hook. Once he decides that he wants to grapple, very difficult to shake him off. He's got really good grappling control. Whereas Dillashaw, even though he's got a base in wrestling, you know, primarily as an MMA fighter, he is a striker these days. So in this fight, when he grappled, it was kind of him just mixing things up, and he wasn't properly committing to his grappling. So when Sandhagen kind of neutralized Dillashaw's grappling, it was impressive, and it leaves me optimistic for Sandhagen's chances of causing Nurmagomedov problems here. But it was very inconclusive because Dillashaw's not committing as hard to his grappling as someone like Nurmagomedov will. But the thing is, you know by now, I say it every week, all we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And if Sandhagen's fight against Dillashaw is pretty much all we've got to work with in terms of gauging what Sandhagen's takedown offense and ground game is like, then ultimately we've got to use that. And it isn't perfect, but it's all we got. So we got to make the best of a bad situation. And of course, because we don't have, you know, a really good quality set of footage to gauge where Sandhagen's takedown offense and ground game is at, like we did with Leon Edwards last week, for example, when we showed that Leon Edwards' takedown offense and ground game was very bad. We don't have the luxury of that with Sandhagen. So the best we can do, we're not going to be able to place a pre-fight bet on a matchup like this because we don't have the answers to the questions we need to do so. But hopefully, just by learning about Sandhagen's grappling, we will be able to hit a live bet on this fight and make some money in live betting. Fingers crossed anyway. So what we're going to do is we will skim through all the grappling exchanges in this fight very quickly and kind of show you where Sandhagen's takedown defense and ground game is at from, you know, what we can see here. Before we do, I will say that I do have one issue with Sandhagen's takedown offense and ground game in this fight, which could get him into trouble against Nurmagomedov, particularly in Abu Dhabi, where it's going to be very difficult to win a decision against Nurmagomedov. Sandhagen takes way too long to work through bad positions, and I fucking hate that. Because when you look at his takedown offense and technical ability, his takedown offense is very good, and he's very difficult to control, and he's very, very good at scrambling back up to his feet when he gets taken down. He's got the technique and the knowledge to do it, but it just takes way too long. He just hesitates a lot, fucks around. Like, there are even sequences in this fight where he kind of complains to the referee that Dillashaw's not doing anything, asking to be separated. And I hate it when fighters do like that, because I do things like that, because I just think instead of you standing there complaining to the referee, you should show some urgency to actually, you know, take this position away from your opponent by working out of it. So that's a really annoying trait. To be fair to Sandhagen, though, you know, he obviously won this fight. The judges absolutely robbed him. We were talking earlier in the video about how bad judging was. Obviously, Sandhagen did win this fight. It was a terrible decision. But still, he did make the fight closer than it needed to be by fucking around and hesitating in certain positions when he could have showed more urgency to work through them, which then gave the corrupt, disgraceful, cheating, fucking scumbag judges an opportunity to take the win from him. But the bright side of that is in Sandhagen's interviews after this fight, he did say that, you know, after watching it back, he realizes where he went wrong. He realizes he allowed Dillashaw to control him for too long, and he should have shown more urgency to work through those positions, which is a really positive sign because this fight was 3 years ago, and a lot can change in 3 years. Sandhagen was only 29 when this fight took place. He could have improved exponentially since this matchup. So we'll just focus on the grappling here, or fight's going to be super long. So here we go. He goes for a flying knee. Dillashaw drives through on a takedown attempt, and Sandhagen goes to the inverted triangle. So we'll just skip through. Weird position, but Sandhagen then decides to roll for a leg. And it's little situations like this which frustrate me about Sandhagen, because you'll see as we work through this fight, he very much knows how to work his way back up to his feet, but in situations like this, he chooses not to. So here you can see Dillashaw posturing up, landing ground and pound. Like 9 times out of 10, when you're on the bottom like this, you're in a losing position and the judge is scoring points for your opponent. And the probability of completing a leg lock submission on someone like TJ Dillashaw, especially in the first round, is so low. So when I see guys like Sandhagen fucking around on the bottom like this, it's just annoying. I just think get up. Get up. Why are you messing around rolling for these legs? Just get up. Dillashaw's giving you the space you need to pop back up. Just get up. And then when you see Sandhagen gets to his knees and stands back up. But you could have done that 30 seconds ago and not taken that ground and pound and not allowed Dillashaw to score. So what you're going to see throughout the clips that I play from this fight is Sandhagen doing a lot of good stuff. Because you can see there when he wanted to stand up, he stood up very easily, which is very good. Especially because Nurmagomedov is only 5'8". He might be undersized in this fight. He may struggle with Sandhagen's size. He might get big brothered a bit. I don't know. Obviously, Sandhagen didn't look the most physically imposing against Peter Yan. But you don't know. He's a big guy. Nurmagomedov's quite small. So that's one issue I have with Sandhagen. He does a lot of good stuff in this fight, but he also makes a lot of rookie mistakes. But in 3 years, that can change. And then in positions like this, there's 3 minutes 20 left to go in the round. Dillashaw doesn't really have anything here. He's got kind of a loosey-goosey body lock. All Sandhagen really needs to do is dig an underhook here, because you can see how much space is in there for him to dig an underhook. And then just turn into Dillashaw and break the grip. But he just fucks about. You know, he's been here for 30 seconds now. Hasn't really made much of an effort to turn into Dillashaw. Now he does. You see just like a second ago. He gets the underhook in. So the underhook's not in at the moment. See? And then he, any second now, puts it in. Here he goes. Any second. God damn, I went back way too far. There we go. He puts the underhook in now, but he should have done that 30 seconds ago. And as soon as he puts the underhook in play, he turns into Dillashaw, and obviously Dillashaw's got to let go of him. So it's just little things like you see on the ground rolling for legs, little things there like taking 30 seconds to dig an underhook and turn into Dillashaw. I find guys like Sandhagen frustrating because they've got the technique, they know what to do because they've shown us they know what to do, but they take too long to do it. And by taking too long to do it, they give their opponent an opportunity to run the clock down and score points. So then we can see Dillashaw in on a takedown. Sandhagen rolls out of it, immediately stands back up, goes immediately to the underhooks and breaks the body lock grip. Very nice. Again, Dillashaw drives forward, gets the body lock, and Sandhagen, and this is what pisses me off about this fight, where Sandhagen from this position just starts looking over at the referee in frustration while he punches Dillashaw in the leg. And there he rolls out of it. And any second now, rolls for another leg, keeps rolling for legs. And even though Dillashaw is giving him loads of space to scramble back up to his feet, he's just fixated on rolling for legs. It makes no sense at all to me. Just keeps rolling for legs, and they end up in this weird position then, you know, at the end of the round. But the thing is, when you have your opponent posturing up like this, they don't have control of your body. You could just scramble back up to your feet, but instead Sandhagen falls in love with a leg lock and doesn't bother. So if we go into round 2, nice takedown offense there from Sandhagen. He got that, he read the takedown entry, got the underhook in play on the right side very early. And you can see does a good job of creating a nice wide base against the cage. For those of you that watched last week's breakdown video on the Leon Edwards Belal Muhammad card, you'll know that we were saying that one of the reasons why Leon Edwards' takedown offense is so bad is that his leg positioning when defending takedowns up against the cage is completely wrong, where he keeps his legs too close together. What you want to see is more what you've got from Sandhagen here, where his legs are much further apart to create a nice wide base. So takedown offense here from Sandhagen, pretty good. He's fighting for underhooks. He's keeping a nice wide base up against the cage. Perfect stuff. It's exactly what he should be doing. Very, very nice. If we scroll through, looking for more takedowns. And this is like this is what I'm talking about with, you know, Sandhagen drawing you into the fiery pits of hell, right? So look at the damage that he inflicts on Dillashaw right here. Take a look at this. Take a look at this, how nasty this is. Take a look at this. Nice combo there. Beautiful combo. Just look at this. Any second now. You can see the cut on his nose. Look at that right hand again. You know, if Sandhagen starts landing shots like that on Nurmagomedov, inflicting damage like that, how's Nurmagomedov going to take it? How's he going to deal with it? Is he going to be able to fight through it? We don't know, because we've never really seen Nurmagomedov in any trouble. But as you can see in these positions, Sandhagen's takedown defense holding up well. Dillashaw comes forward, sets up a nice takedown entry off the strikes. But again, Sandhagen does a good job of getting his back over to the cage, creating that base. You know, makes some mistakes there by allowing Dillashaw to get to his back. The reason why Dillashaw was able to get to his back is because he didn't have underhooks in play. Kind of just casually stood there and tried to rely on his balance to defend the takedown. But again, very difficult to hold him down. He just stands back up and walks over to the cage. But again, mistake from Dillashaw, from Sandhagen, kind of just allowing TJ to just hang on him here at the business end of the round, right at the end of the round. Now, from Sandhagen's perspective, he's probably like, I've definitely won this round with the amount of damage I've inflicted to Dillashaw's eye. There's no point in me exerting loads of energy here to try and work through this position because, well, I've already won this round anyway. I'll just let him hug me for like 30 seconds or whatever. Nice spinning elbow there. And you see more of Sandhagen's takedown offense here. Again, good job of reading the entry, getting his back up against the cage. Overhook on the left side. Again, just kind of allows Dillashaw to hang on him for a little bit. Then he breaks the grip, turns into him, and again neutralizes the threat of Dillashaw's takedown offense. Again, is another takedown attempt off a spinning back kick. Sandhagen scrambly, gets to his knees much faster this time than he did earlier in the fight, but decides to roll for a leg again instead of trying to pop back up. And like I say, you know, when you can get away with these scrambles against someone like TJ Dillashaw, but he might not get away with them against someone like Nurmagomedov. But as you can see, Sandhagen is difficult to take down and hold down. Like, Dillashaw's no picnic. Like, Dillashaw's not an easy fighter to deal with in these positions. He's a decent MMA grappler himself. He might not be the level of Nurmagomedov, that's debatable, but he is he's no joke. He's no joke. And again, Sandhagen just allows guys to control him in positions like this, which is frustrating to watch, but you know, it is what it is. Another takedown attempt, round 4. Beautiful body lock takedown entry there. And again, Sandhagen just takes way too long to work through this position. Eventually he does, but just takes too long to get there. Again, same story, good takedown offense here. Reads the takedown entry, deals with it, but again, just takes a little while to break the grip of Dillashaw and turn into him. Eventually he does, and as soon as he turns into him with those underhooks, Dillashaw has nothing, he's forced to let go. Again, same thing here. Shoots a takedown, initially gives up his back. As soon as he digs underhooks and turns into Dillashaw, Dillashaw doesn't have anything. There he goes, underhooks, turns into him, gone. And that's really the repeating theme of the fight. I think Sandhagen gave the corrupt judges an opportunity to rob him here, because they allowed Dillashaw to spend too much time hugging him. And that was a mistake he made when he clearly had the technique, the skills to break these positions, because anytime he actively tried to break the grip, or what was more effective was actually digging underhooks and turning into Dillashaw, he got out of these positions so easily. And so you can see from this fight that, you know, Sandhagen's takedown defense, ground game, defensive wrestling is pretty good. You know, obviously Nurmagomedov presents a lot more challenges in grappling positions than Dillashaw does, but you know, Sandhagen's takedown defense and ground game is no joke. It's not bad. And remember, this was 3 years ago, so Sandhagen could have improved a hell of a lot since this fight. And then one more, and we'll move on. Decent takedown defense there. Underhook on the right side. Complaining that he's holding his shorts, but anyway. And that's pretty much that fight. So, you know, obviously very difficult to feel super confident on this one without knowing where Sandhagen's takedown defense and ground game is in 2024. But I think anyone experienced at betting on the sport of mixed martial arts will pretty much know what is up with this fight. Nurmagomedov is unbettable at these odds. You know, if you look at his odds, they carry an implied probability of almost 80%. You'd have to give Nurmagomedov an 80% or better in order to get any value here, which is impossible with how good Sandhagen is, how dangerous of a striker he is, how good his defensive wrestling has looked. So if you really want to bet this fight, it's dog or pass. It's Sandhagen or nobody. You've got to bet Sandhagen or don't bet the fight. It's just as simple as that. What I would say is obviously Nurmagomedov is a very high level grappler, and we haven't seen Nurmagomedov, or we haven't seen Sandhagen fight anyone like this in his entire UFC career. So maybe his takedown defense and ground game gets exposed a little bit by Nurmagomedov this weekend. You know, we don't know. At the same time, we've also got to bear in mind the fact that Nurmagomedov is Muslim, and it will be very difficult for Sandhagen to win a decision against Nurmagomedov in Abu Dhabi as a result. It's just a fact. It's just a strong trend. That's the way it is. That's the way it's been on cards in this part of the world since COVID and Fight Island. It's just the way it is. So, you know, I think Sandhagen's got a decent chance of winning this. And I guess it comes down to your risk tolerance, your style of betting, as to whether you want to roll the dice and gamble on him. Personally, it's not the kind of bet I'm looking to place at this stage in my career, where I know throughout August there are going to be many opportunities for me to make a lot of money on football and get my money into some really strong positions betting football. We've got 4 great UFC events this month, which I'm very optimistic we're going to be able to make a profit on in live betting. And I know if I'm patient with pre-fight bets, I'm going to find super strong positions to put my money into, because we've been consistently grinding out profits on pre-fight bets for the last 2 years now. We've done pretty well. So, you know, Sandhagen's a big gamble. At this stage in my career, I'm not the biggest fan of gambling. I like to look for really strong positions for me to put my money, and with this fight being in Abu Dhabi, I think it's going to be very difficult for Sandhagen to win. But if this were in the Apex, or if this were on neutral territory, I would probably take Sandhagen at these odds. So let's take a look at the over-under on this fight. So obviously both guys are tough, both are well-rounded. My logical brain tells me the over is more likely on this fight, because they're both tough, they're both well-rounded. But something's telling me this will end inside the distance, just because there's 2 ways that I could really see this going. The first way being Sandhagen just drags Nurmagomedov into a violent war, busts him up, and kind of stops him in the same way that he did the Yadong Song, because it's too big of a step up in competition for Nurmagomedov, and he isn't ready for that level of violence. He needs to go fight someone else and then work his way back into competing against the very top, nasty, vicious bantamweights like Sandhagen. Then the other side of me is like, the other side of me that thinks this fight, you know, it just got this gut feeling it'll end inside the distance, is Sandhagen does fuck around a lot in grappling positions, like giving his back up, you know, hesitating before working through bad positions, rolling for legs and stuff. And he did get mauled and dominated on the ground by Aljamain Sterling. It was a long time ago. He did kind of get caught cold, but he did still get overwhelmed and basically drowned on the ground against a really high-level submission grappler in Sterling. So I just think with a guy like Nurmagomedov, if you roll for legs and do stupid shit like that and expose your back a lot, Nurmagomedov is at that level where he can really make you pay. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see Nurmagomedov punish Sandhagen for some of these complacent mistakes he makes on the ground and submit him. So my logical brain is like, yeah, fight going to a decision is more likely, but I just have this gut feeling that it won't. But we'll see, we'll see. So in terms of the prop bets for this one, in terms of the props, I don't love any of the props, if I'm honest. I don't really love them very much. I don't love them. So yeah, we'll give them a miss. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Oleksiejczuk and Chiesa Magomedov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Magomedov is the favourite, average odds of about 1.40, which is going to be minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. If we take a look at the odds on Oleksiejczuk, he's around an average of 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Oleksiejczuk, 29 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. Magomedov, 30 years old, 6'2" with a 73-inch reach. They're both pretty much the same age, pretty much the same size. Magomedov is undefeated at 13-0, which is quite incredible when you consider how bad he is on the ground. And the only other X factor that we've got to talk about is obviously Magomedov will have home advantage on his side because he is a Muslim and he is competing in Abu Dhabi, where that means a lot. It makes it very difficult for you to lose decisions. So this is a real interesting fight between two strikers who both have huge weaknesses on the ground. So this is really good matchmaking from the UFC because both these guys have the same weakness and they're both primarily strikers. So this should be a good stand-up fight. I wouldn't be surprised to see Oleksiejczuk grapple in this matchup because he has shot the odd takedown here and there in the past, and I don't think he's going to want to stand and strike with Magomedov. But Oleksiejczuk is quite low level on the ground. His offensive wrestling isn't the best, and while he could have a bit of success with his grappling in this fight, because he's got better striking to set up takedowns than Antonio Trocoli did. So you could see Oleksiejczuk have a bit of success with his grappling in the same way that Bruno Silva had. Bruno Silva had a lot of success with his grappling against Chiesa because he had a bit of striking to set it up. But I just don't think it's that realistic that Oleksiejczuk is going to be able to use a grappling heavy game plan to out-grapple Chiesa for 3 rounds, because Oleksiejczuk's not a grappler. He's very low level on the ground, and he also tends to tire himself out pretty quickly when he grapples. Chiesa did say after the Trocoli fight that you know, he's got a base in Sambo. He knows how to grapple. And I think he was kind of taking shots at guys like me that, you know, thought he would struggle against Trocoli because of how bad his grappling looked against Bruno Silva. I think he was kind of saying, hey, a lot of people wrote me off coming into this fight or didn't think I should be a big favourite. And, you know, I kept the fight standing. Fuck all you guys, right? Which is fair enough. So that was interesting to me because even though Magomedov did look terrible in his debut against Bruno Silva on the ground, he is kind of right. You know, a lot of combat Sambo guys are decent grapplers. Why he didn't show that against Silva, I don't know. His takedown defense looked a lot better against Trocoli. Is it possible that, you know, if Oleksiejczuk tried to take him down, he could cause Oleksiejczuk problems on the ground? I don't know, but it's possible because Oleksiejczuk's grappling is pretty bad. So, based on past performances, I would give Oleksiejczuk the advantage on the ground because Magomedov's ground game has looked a joke. But I have a feeling there may be some sides to Magomedov that we haven't seen. Or he may have looked worse than he actually is in that Silva fight. Or Oleksiejczuk's not going to be able to get his grappling going anyway. So it's just something to think about. Very difficult to trust a guy like Chiesa at this level of mixed martial arts with how bad he is on the ground. We've just got to keep it in mind. It's unlikely to be a factor in this fight, but it's tough to fully trust him until he improves that ground game. So obviously both these guys are primarily strikers. So this should, for the most part, be a stand-up fight. And they have very different styles of striking. So Shara Magomedov is very technical. He's got true legit knockout power. He's very dangerous on the feet, but he's got more of a sniper style of striking. So he doesn't throw a particularly high volume. He just looks to kind of stand back and catch you with big singular counter strikes to kind of snipe you and take you out. And he's very good at that. He's very fast. He's very accurate. But that's kind of the style he's bringing to the table. Oleksiejczuk's very different. He's like a Polish Nate Diaz. He's a high pressure, high volume, big action fighter. He likes to come forward, take control of the center of the octagon, pepper you with jabs, and kind of overwhelm you with pressure and volume. Now, this is a very effective style in mixed martial arts, because if you don't give your opponent time to breathe and you smother them in pressure, they have to fight in a constant state of reactiveness, where they're reacting to what you're doing, which makes it difficult for them to execute their own game plan and control their heart rate, keep their breathing under control, all that type of stuff. So being a high pressure fighter in MMA is a very good strategy, and a lot of fighters like Tony Ferguson have built very successful careers off it. Obviously Ferguson's going through tough times these days, right? But Ferguson was in the UFC lightweight title picture for a big chunk of his career. He has had a successful career overall. So with Oleksiejczuk, the problem he's got with his fighting style is, in order to be an effective pressure fighter, you need to have the chin, the durability, the toughness to maintain that pressure. Because when you're a pressure fighter, you are going and getting right in your opponent's face and engaging them and standing right in front of them. And as a result, you're going to get hit a lot. And the goal of the pressure fighting style is to kind of wear your opponents down, where you're not giving them space to breathe. But if you think about guys like Tony Ferguson in his prime, if you think about Nate Diaz in his prime, the reasons why these guys were so successful at executing the pressure fighting style was because of how tough and durable they were. You know, they could take so much damage, so many shots, and still keep coming forward without slowing down. Oleksiejczuk is different, because he does tend to get rocked, wobbled, and dropped a lot, which is a bit of a flaw in the strategy and a flaw in the fighting style. And it obviously puts him in a little bit of trouble against someone like Shara, because Shara is one of those accurate sniping counter strikers that, you know, is the type of guy that can punish Oleksiejczuk for his relentless pressure and his aggressiveness as he comes forward. So this is, I heard my dog come in. So this is one of those fights where, you know, it's a pretty good stylistic matchup for Shara, because he's so dangerous on the feet, and Oleksiejczuk has such a tendency to get dinged and dropped and wobbled and knocked out, that you'd think Shara will catch him with something at some point and put him away. I was hoping Shara's odds were going to be better, if I'm honest with you. When I first checked out the odds for this event, Shara was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet. But, you know, in order to bet someone at this odds range, you know, 1.40 implied probability of 71%, they have to have virtually no way to lose. You know, a 71% implied probability, that's a steep probability. You know, in order to be profitable on bets in this odds range, you know, you've got to win 3 out of every 4 bets. It's very difficult on any odds range to maintain a win rate that high. So, you know, unless I can bet a guy in this odds range that has virtually no way to lose, like unless I'm betting on Francis Ngannou to beat my sister, I try to avoid these odds ranges if possible, because they're a trappy odds range. And so I do think Shara wins this, but with his issues on the ground, with how bad his takedown defense is, as much as I don't think it's going to be an issue in this fight, because I don't think Oleksiejczuk's the guy to make him pay for that, it is still a heavy price to pay for a guy with no ground game in a mixed martial arts contest. So, and again, just to kind of put the cherry on top of that point, Bruno Silva is no worse of an MMA grappler than Oleksiejczuk, and yet Silva was able to have a lot of success with grappling in this fight. He did lose the fight, but he did cause Shara a lot of problems. Maybe Oleksiejczuk can go one step further and get the win, but of course it won't be easy to win this fight by decision, because we know Magomedov has got home advantage on his side. So if we take a look at the over-under on this matchup, we can see that the over 1.5 rounds or the main over under is set at over 1.5 rounds. I wouldn't touch that. I wouldn't touch that. My gut tells me that it will end up under 1.5 rounds just because of how dangerous Chiesa is and how fragile Oleksiejczuk is. I think Chiesa probably gets an early knockout in this one, but I don't feel as confident as I would need to be in order to bet that. Fight doesn't go to a decision at 1.47. Now that is very tempting. That is very, very tempting, because if you look at Oleksiejczuk's record, he's only been to a decision in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So he's only been to a decision in 2 of his 14 UFC fights. Now I know that Magomedov went to a decision against Bruno Silva, but that was because Silva was able to run the clock down with a lot of grappling, and Trocoli was also kind of able to run the clock down with a lot of grappling as well, with those takedown attempts up against the cage. So it was only in the second half of the fight, when Trocoli was forced to stand and strike, that Chiesa was able to let his hands go and cause Trocoli problems. So I'm actually very tempted to bet fight doesn't go to a decision. I would probably pay the steeper odds on fight doesn't go to a decision as opposed to under 2.5 rounds, simply because Oleksiejczuk has slowed down in some past fights. So you could see a situation where Oleksiejczuk fades a little bit like Trocoli did, and Chiesa takes him out late like he did to Trocoli. I know the under 2.5 rounds would have cashed here by 3 seconds, I think, but you guys get my point. So I'm actually very tempted by that. I know it's still pretty steep favourite odds, but it comes at an implied probability of 68%. If we know that, so what percent is 14 of 16? So 87.5%. So 80. So let's call it. So just say 88% of Oleksiejczuk's UFC fights have ended inside the distance, and the way these two match up stylistically suggests there is likely to be a finish. So even though it's relatively steep odds, I do feel this could be a pretty good bet, because the implied probability is 68% and 88% of Oleksiejczuk's fights have ended inside the distance. Plus we've got a clash of styles where a finish is quite likely, to be fair. I think the only way this fight goes to a decision is if Oleksiejczuk actually does grapple like Bruno Silva did, and actually does have success with it, and kind of lay and praise on Magomedov and runs the clock down in kind of the same way that that Bruno Silva did, to be fair. So yeah, I think what I'm going to do, that's a bet, if you're watching on YouTube, that's a bet for you to consider. What I'm going to do, which is what I often do before locking in bets, I'm going to go research this fight for a second time, just to be absolutely sure I like this bet. And then if I do pull the trigger, I will obviously let my members know via the website, and I will also post it on the Discord, because I don't like jumping into bets. I thought the odds would be steeper than that, so I don't like jumping into bets. I like to give it some thought. I don't like to just do it, you know, jump into a bet while I'm recording a video. That is interesting to me, though. Let me know what you think on Discord. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Okay, so alright, so in terms of props, I think most likely outcome is Magomedov by knockout or TKO, but the odds are terrible on that. They're way too steep, and to be honest, that is the only prop that I would consider on this one, and the odds are too steep for me. So I hope you found that breakdown very useful. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is such an interesting fight between Marlon Vera and Deiveson Figueiredo. And this is definitely a fight we're going to include quite a lot of footage in, because this is one of those matchups where I don't think who wins this will come down to like skill or who's the better fighter. I think the winner of this matchup will come down to the choices that Marlon Vera makes. This is Marlon Vera's fight to lose. He's got all the skills needed to win. This fight is just really going to come down to whether he chooses to or not, or whether he trying to not be too critical. Marlon Vera has terrible fight IQ. I don't really think of any other way to dress it up. He makes terrible decisions in fights. You know, he's got all the skills needed to make this a very easy fight for himself, but Vera has a habit of making life difficult for himself. So that's what makes this a very interesting fight. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Figueiredo is the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.69, which is going to be minus 145 for an implied probability of 59%. If we take a look at the odds on Vera, he's around an average of 2.20, which is going to be plus 120 for an implied probability of 45%. So Figueiredo is 36 years old, 5'5", with a 68-inch reach, and Marlon Vera is 31 years old, 5'8", with a 70.5-inch reach. So we can see that Vera is 5 years younger than Figueiredo, which is a pretty big deal, to be fair, because at 36 years old, Figueiredo is very old for a bantamweight, so he should be declining from fight to fight. Although what I would say is, obviously, since the beginning of the year, there's been very little performance-enhancing drug testing in the UFC, and we are seeing a lot of fighters, Al Muhammad, look significantly better than they have done in the past, and I do attribute a lot of that probably down to performance-enhancing drug usage. And I would say Deiveson Figueiredo does fit the profile of someone that is quite likely to use performance-enhancing drugs, and I won't go into why, but that means Figueiredo could look a lot better this weekend than he has in the past. Having said that, we did see him back, in April against Cody Garbrandt. He looked pretty strong, pretty physically imposing in that fight, to be fair, so he might have been on the juice back then too. So, very interesting fight this. Obviously, different body types as well. Figueiredo used to be a flyweight. He's got a small, muscular, powerful, compact frame. Marlon Vera is longer and taller and leaner and longer. So, the way I look at this fight is, at this stage in their careers, Marlon Vera is significantly better than Figueiredo everywhere. I can't think of a single advantage Figueiredo has. Vera's the better striker, the better grappler, he's got the better cardio, and he's got the better chin as well. He's more durable. The one thing that Vera doesn't have, though, and perhaps I jumped the gun by saying that Vera is better than Figueiredo everywhere, because he isn't. I've just remembered why. So Vera has better cardio than Figueiredo. He's tougher and more durable. He's got better striking, better grappling. But the one thing that Vera doesn't have is better fight IQ. Figueiredo's very intelligent, very strategic. He knows how to win, and he knows how to steal rounds and pace himself. He knows how to get the most out of what he has. He knows how to do the best with what he's working with. And when you look at a fight like this, even though Vera has got so many more advantages over Figueiredo than Figueiredo has over him, GSP famously said that fighting is 90% mental. And as a result, fight IQ, game planning, strategy is the most important attribute to having an MMA fighter, because you could be the most skilled fighter in the world, but if you don't know how to win, it's going to hold you back. And Vera is a great example of this. His record kind of looks impressive, but it would look a lot less impressive if he would have lost these two fights. And I've singled these two fights out because he was actually losing both fights. In fact, he was losing the Frankie Edgar fight as well. Vera could easily be 1-5 in his last 6 fights, because he was losing these fights before kind of coming from behind against Cruz and Edgar. And in the Rob Font fight, he got outstruck by a wide margin, but just kept wobbling Font, which would enable him to steal rounds. It was such a strange fight. But the reason why I'm saying that is because Vera just doesn't seem to understand how fights are scored. And as a result, he does things which just make no sense. And he's a very difficult fighter to trust because of this. Vera's one of these guys that almost kind of relies on his ability to like do something in order to get the win, because that's kind of what has happened before in his career, right? It's kind of like he was losing against Frankie Edgar, he was losing against Rob Font, he was losing against Dominic Cruz, but he kind of just hung in there, and then like a bit of magic happened which enabled him to get the wins in those fights. But the problem with relying on magic and like random, you know, I'm not going to say random things because you make your own luck at the end of the day. Vera did knock Cruz out. You know, he did wobble Font multiple times. He did knock Frankie Edgar out. He did do these things. But the problem with relying on like big moments to win fights as opposed to outperforming your opponent and winning rounds is eventually run into someone that you won't finish. Like a Sean O'Malley or like a Cory Sandhagen, and then you kind of get dominated. I know that the Sandhagen fight ended a split decision, but it was a terrible split decision. It should never have been a split decision, and Sandhagen was very, very dominant. So this style has kind of worked for him against Edgar, Cruz and Font, but then it's cost him in those high stakes fights against O'Malley and Sandhagen, and it might cost him again against Figueiredo this weekend. And what's frustrating is he doesn't seem to learn. He still seems to make the same mistakes. So, with Vera, what mistakes am I talking about? So, and again, so a big part of this breakdown video is going to focus on Vera's issues, because again, it's his fight to lose, and whether he wins this or not is going to come down to whether he shows up and fights smart for once. So the issues with Vera is, number one, he's a very slow starter. He almost always loses the first round of fights. There are just guys that do this. In last week's breakdown videos, we were saying that Colin Loughran does exactly the same thing, and that ended up costing him against Jake Hadley, where he barely did anything in the first round of that fight. Some guys just start very slow, take a little while to get going. The week before that, we were saying Josh Van is a very slow starter. It takes him a while to get going as well. Marlon Vera is exactly the same. Marlon Vera almost always loses the first round of a fight, and then he picks things up a little bit in round 2, and he really goes for it in round 3. But, you know, by doing that, he gives himself very little room for error, because by basically taking the first round off and not doing anything, you then put a lot of pressure on yourself to win the second and third rounds. And if he gets flash knocked down or something like that in rounds 2 and 3, it's hard for him to win, because he's got to do a lot to outscore his opponent that might have scored that knockdown. So, number one thing Vera does, which gets him into trouble, very slow starter. Second thing that he does is he just has long periods of inactivity, where he'll kind of stand in front of his opponent and he'll throw a lot of feints while they're kind of chipping away at him, but he won't really fire back. He's looking for like that perfect shot to really hurt them with, and because of that, you do get long periods of inactivity from him where he can be outpointed. The third issue with Marlon Vera, and this is by far the most frustrating issue and most frustrating aspect of his game, just like Leon Edwards last week, his takedown offense and ground game is an absolute joke. Awful, terrible, shocking. And that is quite significant in the context of this fight, because while Davison Figueiredo was predominantly a striker in the flyweight division, in the bantamweight division, now that he's moved up, he seems to be evolving into more of a grappler. If we look at his last 2 fights in the bantamweight division, before that he was competing in the flyweight division, he used a lot of grappling in his fights against both Garbrandt and Font. More grappling than we're used to seeing him use. So it seems like Figgy is switching things up and evolving into a different fighter in this new division, which obviously poses problems to Marlon Vera, because his ground game is a joke. And when you look at someone like Cody Garbrandt, I know people love to talk a lot of shit about Cody Garbrandt. I love to talk shit about Cody Garbrandt because I think he's an evil little fucker for mutilating dogs' ears. I think it's absolutely disgusting, the process of what he does as a dog breeder to mutilate dogs' ears. It's actually illegal to do that in the UK and many countries. For some reason, you can still do it in the United States. So I'm not the biggest fan of Garbrandt. I think he's a bit of a dick for hurting dogs needlessly in that way. However, What I can say about Garbrandt is his takedown defense is absolutely bulletproof. His ground game is excellent, and he's one of these guys that is virtually impossible to hold down. No one other than Figueiredo has ever been able to really cause him problems on the ground, and yet in his last fight Figueiredo overwhelmed him and mauled him on the ground, which is very, very strange to see. So I know a lot of people are very critical about Garbrandt over his chin and his downfall and his decline. Could be down to karma. Like I say, he does mutilate the ears of dogs and puppies, so maybe the universe giving Garbrandt what he deserves there. But in terms of his MMA grappling, it's always been top tier, absolutely incredible stuff. And so if Figueiredo can do that to Garbrandt, he could quite literally maul Marlon Vera, because the level between Garbrandt and Vera on the ground is like they're in different universes. Garbrandt is so far above his level, and there are people, there are MMA fans, there are people about this sport who are very linear thinkers, and they have very tunnel vision with this sport, and they cannot possibly comprehend how a fighter in his prime at the top of the bantamweight division like Vera could be so much worse than someone like Garbrandt, who's probably ranked 20 spaces below him and on a significant decline. But the sport is very nuanced, it's very complex, and when it comes to MMA grappling, Cody Garbrandt is on a completely different level to Vera. Vera's ground game is a joke. Garbrandt's ground game, MMA grappling, is fucking fantastic. It's just the way it is. So when I look at what Figueiredo was able to do against Cody Garbrandt, or to Cody Garbrandt, this could be a real tough stylistic matchup for Vera. But of course, words are just words, and talk is cheap. Like I always say, the only place you'll find truth and honesty in this game is in the fight footage. It will set you free. It will set you free from everyone in the comment section that tells me wrong, tells me I'm wrong, or everyone that will come to my Discord and say, you've got no idea what you're talking about. And I'm like, well, the great thing about breaking down MMA fights is we actually can come with receipts, and we can show you what is true. And so let's come with receipts for Mr. Marlon Vera's takedown defense and ground game. So we don't want to make this breakdown super long, so we'll just focus on one fight. And if you don't think this is strong enough evidence for Vera's takedown defense and ground game being a joke, you can just go watch more of his fights and do your own research. The Frankie Edgar fight is a fucking fantastic one to watch to illustrate this point, although it was a very long time ago. So if we take a look at Vera's takedown defense and ground game, you guys know me by now. I said this last week when we were breaking down Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad, and I said it with the Cory Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov breakdown as well. It is not a deal breaker for me if you have bad takedown defense. It doesn't matter all that much, so long as you can quickly work your way back up to your feet. Having bad takedown defense is only a mega deal breaker when you're one of these guys like Marlon Vera, that when they get taken down, they don't show any urgency to work their way back up to their feet. They kind of just lie on their back doing absolutely nothing. And that is the kind of guy Marlon Vera is. So if we hit play, we can see Sandhagen shoots the takedown here, and Vera does a good job of stuffing it. You know, he feeds Sandhagen the single leg, shows good balance to back up against the cage, goes to the overhook straight away, starts hand fighting on his right side to prevent Sandhagen from gaining control of his body. This is all good from Vera. This is all good stuff. There's no red flags here. There's a little bit of a red flag now because his legs are getting a little bit too close together. We spoke about that with the Leon Edwards breakdown last week. But as you can see, he's fighting hands, tight overhook. This is all good. But then you see that Vera is one of these guys that just has absolutely no balance at all, similar to Leon Edwards last week. And as soon as you get in on his legs and Sandhagen shifts his body weight on this outside trip, Vera goes down like an 80-year-old woman. Now, this isn't a deal breaker. This isn't so bad because he's not in a terrible position here. He's got butterfly guard, at least on the left side. He's got butterfly guard, and he's relatively close to the cage. It's not like he's been taken down in the middle of the octagon where he's not close enough to the cage to be able to use it to wall walk back up to his feet. Vera's not in a terrible position. He's also got 2 minutes and 20 seconds left to go in the round, so plenty of time to scramble over the cage and quickly start working your way back up to your feet. But what does he do? Absolutely nothing is the answer. Just throws elbows off his back. And remember in the Sandhagen versus Dillashaw breakdown where we were saying, you know, whenever you see the guy on top posture up like this, essentially they're giving the guy on the bottom enough space to scramble back up to their feet. And it's the biggest red flag ever, where you see the guy on the bottom, either someone like Sandhagen, or in this instance someone like Vera, not take that invitation to stand back up. And you could just see Vera just kind of lies on his back, just doing a whole lot of nothing really, you know, just getting smashed. And look, Sandhagen's posturing up. Look at how much space there is in there for Vera to kick off on the body or the legs or the hips of Sandhagen and either try to stand back up or scramble over to the cage. But he just stays on the ground, just fucking looking very weak off his back. And so with 2 minutes and 20 seconds left to go in the round, despite the fact that Sandhagen postured up multiple times to land ground and pound, Vera made pretty much no effort to get back up to his feet. So then if we go into round 2, similar sort of story really. Early in round 2, gets taken down here. You know, terrible takedown offense. So, you know, I was saying this in the live betting group last week in the context of the Paddy Pimblett versus Bobby Green fight. So I always make this point so that just people can learn about the sport and MMA grappling. So basically, you guys hear me say all the time that good bets don't always win, bad bets don't always lose, right? What that implies is there's a lot of good luck involved in sports and there's a lot of bad luck involved in sports. And so sometimes when fighters do the wrong thing, they get rewarded. And sometimes when fighters do the right thing, they get punished. And generally speaking, trying to defend a takedown attempt with a guillotine is never a good idea, because 9 times out of 10, when you try to defend a takedown attempt with a guillotine, all that's going to happen is the guy is just going to take you down into half guard or side control, defend the guillotine, and then you're going to have to let go of his head and you're going to end up on the bottom. And we know 9 times out of 10 the guy on the bottom is in a losing position. The only time where I think it is acceptable is if you're a Pedro Munoz type fighter who's got an amazing guillotine, and if you don't get the guillotine, you're incredible at quickly working your way back up to your feet. So Pedro Munoz was the kind of guy that would commit hard to the guillotine when you tried to take him down, but then as soon as he realized he didn't have it, he'd be able to immediately clear his legs out from underneath you and pop back up. But most of the time, the fighters that are trying to defend takedowns with guillotines do not have a Pedro Munoz style guillotine, and they sure as hell don't have the ability that Pedro Munoz has to quickly scramble back up. And that's certainly the case with Vera because of how weak he is off his back. So someone as weak on their back as Vera should never be defending takedowns with guillotines, because 9 times out of 10 he's just going to end up on his back in a losing position. Maybe even 95 times out of 100. I'm sure he has got some guillotine wins on his record. Maybe he hits a guillotine on Figgy off his back this weekend. And maybe 1 in every 15 to 20 fights he'll get a lucky win with this technique, but it's not the correct thing to do. Good bets don't always win, bad bets don't always lose, and 9 times out of 10 doing this is just going to put you in trouble. I reference this because it reminded me last week when Bobby Green shot a takedown on Paddy Pimblett. Paddy Pimblett did the incorrect thing in trying to defend the takedown attempt with a guillotine. The irony is that even though he submitted Bobby Green, it wasn't off the guillotine. He actually had to let go of the guillotine, which kind of proves my point. But he quickly transitioned to a triangle, which he was able to use to submit Bobby Green, which was very, very nice. Congratulations to Paddy. I just want to bring that up just so that you can see, you know, whenever you're watching MMA, it's the wrong thing to do, man. I mean, look at this. You know, in this position, Vera should be looking to get his legs back underneath him, build a solid base against the cage, and use this guillotine to dig underhooks to stuff the takedown. Instead, though, he's like, nah, I'll just flop to my back and try and hit a long shot guillotine, which of course doesn't work. Sandhagen did exactly what I described most guys will do. Just chill in half guard, wait for you to let go of the head. Vera has absolutely nothing here, but he's put himself in this position. And there you go. And now he's on the bottom. And that's what happens 9 times out of 10 when you try to defend a takedown with a guillotine. It's a bad idea. Every once in a while someone will hit a Hail Mary submission, and then I will get some guy in the comments telling me how clueless I am, and it was obvious that was going to happen, and X fighter looked at, looked absolutely amazing, when in actual fact he did the wrong thing and get rewarded. But this is just so you know, when you see guys like Vera pulling guard on guillotine attempts, defending takedowns, it's red flag city. Because if he does this to Figueiredo, with how heavy Figueiredo's top game is, how good his grappling control is, Figgy's going to be very happy. He's going to be gifted top position. So I just want to make a point here. Vera was taken down with about 3 minutes 55 left to go in the round, and if we skim through again, and he's not even in a bad position here, because again, just like in round 1, he's relatively close to the cage. Literally all he has to do is scoot his butt, half a foot over to the cage, and he can start the process of wall walking. But he's dreadful off his back. He's been on the ground for a minute now. This is 2 minutes. So he spends about 2.5 minutes on the ground in round 2. So we go into round 3. There's less grappling in the second half of this fight. I think Sandhagen starts feeling himself a little bit and starts to think, stand and bang a little bit. Getting to round 4, sorry. And and what makes Vera really frustrating is that there are flashes within this fight that he does show good takedown offense, like here. Look at this entry from Sandhagen, and there is actually another entry like this in round 3 that we passed through. But that's a good entry from Vera. He does a good job scooting his butt over to the cage, and then getting, and here's another one. Look at this takedown entry here. Watch this, watch this. Look at this. Look at this takedown entry. Look at that beautiful entry from Sandhagen. Nice deep takedown entry. And Vera does everything right. Keeps his legs underneath him. Creates a nice wide base against the cage. Overhook on the left side. Shows good balance. Digs that underhook on the left side. And shrugs the takedown off. And this is what I'm talking about when it comes to Marlon Vera being a frustrating fighter to watch. Because in these sequences, like, look at this takedown defense here. Watch. Look at this sprawl out of this takedown. Look at this. He reads it, just sprawls out of the takedown. Like, why can you do that in rounds 4, but you couldn't do it in rounds 1 and 2? Why are you pulling guard on guillotine attempts in round 2 and then showing bulletproof takedown defense in round 4? This is why Vera is such a frustrating fighter to watch. Because in these sequences, he's shown us that he's got the skills. He's shown us that he's got good takedown defense. But then, in the exact same fight, he'll pull guard on guillotine attempts and fall over like an 80-year-old woman. It just doesn't make any sense. It just does not make any sense. Like, look here at this takedown entry from Sandhagen. Nice deep entry, but straight away, look at how quickly Vera gets underhooks in play. Look at this. Look at these underhooks straight away. Beautiful work from Vera. Very good takedown defense. Nice wide base up against the cage. And just deals with the takedown brilliantly. Really, really good takedown defense from Vera. That's a good entry there from Sandhagen. Turns the corner on a single leg, straight into Vera's guard. But then you can see, look, Vera showing a bit more urgency to create space for himself and get back up to his feet. Look at this urgency from him. Look at this urgency. Look at this urgency for him. He's got the active guard. He's trying to create space for himself, and he gets a little bit of space. And you can see here, he's a little bit of space, and he's up, 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 up. Why not do that earlier in the fight? Again, he's in a tricky position here, but again, goes to butterfly guard. And then shows a little bit of urgency. Kicks off on Sandhagen, and he's up, 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 up. Might have been an illegal strike in there, but, what's an illegal strike between friends? But you get my point. In this 4th and 5th round, Vera's doing some good stuff. He's throwing a high volume of strikes. He's putting some pressure on Vera. He's difficult to hold down. His takedown defense looks good. All this is very good. And so this is what makes Vera a very, very frustrating fighter to watch and a very frustrating fighter to bet on. Because he's like Jekyll and Hyde. If the version of Marlon Vera that we saw in rounds 1, 2 and 3 against Sandhagen shows up against Figueiredo, then he will very likely lose this fight on Saturday night. But if the Marlon Vera that showed up in rounds 4 and 5 against Sandhagen shows up against Figueiredo, then Vera will probably dominate Figueiredo and knock him out. He's like Jekyll and Hyde. So as someone that bets on MMA, how are we supposed to bet this fight when we don't know what version of Marlon Vera we're going to get? all we can really do is, you know, look at Vera's past performances to try and predict the most likely way in which this will go. But we don't know, man. You know, Vera has probably just been given a bit of a reality check maybe by his loss to O'Malley. And so, you know, maybe he would have woke up and realised that if he wants to be a UFC champion, which he does, right? He talks about his family and his daughter. And he's a very passionate guy who's on a continual journey of self-improvement. But if he wants to get that belt, he needs to fight smarter. He needs to be more consistent. Can't afford to be taking round one off in every fight and hoping things work out for him. So maybe Vera's learned from his losses to Sandhagen and O'Malley. I think there's a lot more to learn from the fight against Sandhagen. It could have been very different for Vera had he actually tried to defend takedowns and work his way back up to his feet in the first half of that matchup. So this is one of those fights where I look at it and I go, this is an easy fight for Vera if he just actually fights to his full potential for 3 rounds, and he doesn't take round 1 off, and he doesn't have long periods of inactivity, and he doesn't give up cheap takedowns. So based on past performances, the most likely way this is going to go is Vera will probably start very slow, and Figueiredo will probably punish him for that. Figgy usually waits until like round 2 to really go do his grappling, but you know, Figgy has got a good chance of landing some big shots outstriking Vera in round 1. I think who wins round 2 will very much depend on which version of Vera shows up, how aggressive he is, how active he is at stuffing takedowns and working his way back up to his feet. So round 2 is a bit of a coin flip for me. And then round 3 Vera will very, very likely give Figueiredo hell, and it'll come down to, you know, how that second round went. Vera will almost always have turned up by the 3rd round. He almost always wins round 3. He almost always looks good in round 3. Sometimes it's too little too late though. But it's a great fight. The only thing that I will also say, and I don't really know where to slot it in, because it's kind of something we don't ever have to talk about that often, but Figueiredo is a bit of a dirty fighter actually. And I always give people the benefit of the doubt. Inherently, I believe that most people are good people. So I do give people the benefit of the doubt. But at this point, Figueiredo committing fouls in his fights is so clear, obvious, and prevalent that it cannot be ignored. So Figueiredo is someone that slows down in fights. And to get around this, I believe he intentionally commits fouls in order to get extra breaks in fights. Because obviously if he kicks his opponent in the nuts, they might take 30, 40 seconds, maybe even a couple minutes to recover, maybe even longer, which gives Figueiredo an extra break. And then he can poke him in the eye and get another extra break. If you go back and watch Figueiredo's fights from the last few years, any fight that he has run into trouble in, or any fight where he starts to look tired, he'll commit a foul. And then after the foul, he'll come out fresher because he will have had an opportunity to recharge his batteries. So he is a dirty fighter, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit of that this weekend if this fight turns into a bit of a knockdown, drag-out war. There are not many fighters that do this in MMA, fortunately. Figueiredo might be one of the only guys I can think of. It might be coincidence, it might just be variance, it might just be bad luck or good luck, depending on what side of the Figueiredo train you're on. It might not be intentional, it might just be down to chance. Like, you know, the spin of a roulette wheel landing on, you know, a red number 20 times in a row. Happens regularly, right? If you sit and stare at a roulette wheel all day long. It might just be down to chance. But whether it is down to chance or it is intentional is irrelevant. If you go watch his fights from the last few years, it is undeniable. This guy commits a lot of fucking fouls. It's just the way it is. And mysteriously, he's very good at not committing the foul. It's the same foul twice because he doesn't want to risk having a point deducted. So he'll go for the full spectrum, the plethora of fouls. He'll hit you with a net shot. He'll poke you in the eye. He'll grab a cage. And he might even hold your shorts as well, because MMA rules are broken And Figueiredo knows he can get away with committing one of each foul and not have to worry about a point deducted, because MMA referees are terrible at their job. So that's how I see this fight going. Easy fight for Vera. He should, if he shows up, performs his full potential, lets it go from round one, Figueiredo won't be able to hold him down, and he will light Figueiredo up on the feet and butcher him. But if he starts slow, takes round one off, fucks about a bit in round two, gives up cheap takedowns, lies on his back for ages without doing much, then Figgy could definitely grind out a win. So what does all this mean from a betting point of view? It does mean that Marlon Vera is a very, very tempting bet. But I've just got a principle and a rule that I do not bet on guys with bad fight IQ. So guys like Marlon Vera, guys like Kevin Holland, they're in a box that I keep locked and I do not touch. I just cannot trust guys like this that consistently make bad decisions in fights. So my lean on this fight is very much Marlon Vera, but he ain't the kind of guy I want to be betting, because if I do bet him this weekend and he starts giving up cheap takedowns, lying on his back, doing absolutely nothing, I'm going to want to smash my fucking TV up. And I don't really want to buy a new TV at the moment, because I kind of like the one I've already got. So my lean is very much Vera on this fight, but he ain't the kind of guy I like to bet. So if we take a look at the over-under on this one, it's very interesting. The odds are very much heavily favouring fight go into a decision. Probably because if you look at Figueiredo's record, a good amount of his fights go deep. If you look at Marlon Vera's record, he's a bit of a decisionator. Both guys are very durable. Both guys are very well-rounded. Personally, I would just play the odds on this one. If you really want to bet the over-under, I would not bet fight goes to a decision, because both these guys are pretty violent. And if Vera really goes for it this weekend, I don't think Figueiredo will be able to hang with him. I don't think he'll be able to keep up with the pace that he sets. I think Vera will light him up on the feet and likely stop Figueiredo. I don't trust Vera enough to actually bet it because of all the reasons we've explained in this video. But obviously, the fight goes to a decision gives you a better risk to reward ratio in the odds than the steep favourite odds on fight going to a decision. In terms of the props, Vera by knockout or TKO is interesting to me, but the odds are too short. I wouldn't bet that at those odds. Maybe Vera to win in round 3. Figgy does have a tendency to slow. Vera does have a good amount of third round finishes on his record. There's 2 there. 4th round finish there, because he does finish strong. He does go for the kill late on. He does try and take you out late on. So if we look at the odds on Vera to win in round 3, 15.0 plus 1,400. I actually like that prop quite a lot. So you might want to sprinkle a few shekels on that. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's get into the next one, which is going to be Tony El Cucuy Ferguson versus Michael the Maverick Chiesa. 2 of the best nicknames in the game. 2 of the best nicknames in the game. Don't get much better than that. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Michael Chiesa, one of the biggest favourites on the card, at average odds of around 1.16, which is going to be minus 625 for an implied probability of 86%. If we take a look at the odds on Tony Ferguson, we can see he is around an average of 5.40, which is going to be plus 440 for an implied probability of 19%. So Tony Ferguson, 40 years old, 5'11", with a 76.5-inch reach. Chiesa, 36 years old, 6'1", with a 75.5-inch reach. So both guys are, I guess, roughly the same size and not too different in age. But obviously there are not many 40-year-olds competing in the UFC for a reason. This is a young man's game. We know Tony Ferguson is on a steep decline. That's reflected by the fact that he's coming into this matchup on the back of a 7-fight losing streak. Things haven't been going well for Chiesa either. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, but obviously these guys have got a long history in the sport, and as a result, the UFC keep them around. So they're not totally morally bankrupt. They're just, I would say, significantly morally bankrupt. So as a company, they're not a completely horrible company. They're just a pretty horrible company, okay? Because when you look at a fight like this, it's nice that they keep guys like Chiesa and Ferguson around. But when you look at the stylistic matchup, it is a bit savage, because Tony Ferguson, in his fights against Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett, he's had a bit of success on the feet. And if you remember in his fight against Michael Chandler, he actually rocked Michael Chandler as well. So on the feet, in 3 of his last 4 fights, I understand Ferguson hasn't looked great, but he's actually had a bit of success against Michael Chandler, Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett. So why don't the UFC give Ferguson like a low-level striker in the division who is probably not going to try to take him down and is probably not that high level on the feet? So it just gives Ferguson an opportunity to, you know, maybe he won't win, but he might not, you know, get absolutely mauled like he tends to do in all of his fights and have a further 10 years taken off his life. I just don't understand the matchmaking here, because if you look at Ferguson's fights from the last few years, he got mauled on the ground by Paddy, mauled on the ground by Bobby Green, he got mauled on the ground by Charles Oliveira, and now you are throwing him into a fight against someone that, outside of Charles Oliveira, is like way nastier than any of these guys that Ferguson has faced. And a big part of that is due to the size and physicality of Chiesa. Obviously, Beneil Dariush, a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Justin Gaethje, former NCAA Division 1 level wrestler. So all things being equal, if we didn't have weight classes, sure, guys like Gaethje and Oliveira and Dariush, Chandler, NCAA Division 1 level guy, you could argue they're better grapplers than Chiesa, better MMA grapplers. But when we have weight classes, what makes Chiesa so difficult to deal with is that he has that crushing physicality to his grappling. Like real crushing grappling control. Like the guy just, he's just so heavy on the ground. And when he obtains dominant positions on the ground, it's very difficult to shake him off. The guy is a monster. I don't want to necessarily call him a weight bully, because once upon a time he actually fought at lightweight just like Tony Ferguson did. But this guy's got such crushing physicality to his grappling control and ground game. And when you look at Tony Ferguson at 40 years old in this stage in his career, he does look physically weak. You know, from a technical point of view, he's light years above Paddy Pimblett on the ground or Bobby Green on the ground. You know, he's a Eddie Bravo Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. It's one of the highest level black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You know, an Eddie Bravo Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt is as top tier and as good as it gets. But Ferguson got mauled and dominated on the ground by significantly less skilled grapplers like Paddy Pimblett and Bobby Green, just because he doesn't have the physicality to match him anymore. He's very fragile at this stage in his career at 40 years old, right? It's a young man's game. So if Tony Ferguson is struggling on the ground against low-level grapplers like Paddy and Bobby, imagine what a guy like Michael Chiesa can do to him. That is a very skilled MMA grappler with crushing grappling control. So it's a terrible fight for Tony. You know, based on Tony's performances against Chandler, Bobby Green, Paddy Pimblett, probably can cause Chiesa a few problems on the feet. Chiesa's a bit stiff, doesn't move particularly well. It's pretty bad defensively. But as soon as Chiesa grabs a hold of Ferguson, you know, Ferguson's got no takedown defense. No physicality to his ground game anymore. Chiesa is just going to drag him to the ground and absolutely drown him, and it's as simple as that. Very, very unlikely that Ferguson wins this. Chiesa is just a nightmare stylistic matchup for Ferguson because of how these two match up when it comes to grappling, which is a real shame. It is a very real shame. It's a very real shame, because I feel that the UFC could have been a bit kinder with their matchmaking. If Ferguson's getting out grappled by fucking Paddy Pimblett and Bobby Green, this is just a pointless fight, because like Chiesa's so much better than those guys on the ground. So if we take a look at the over under on this one, I would be pretty shocked if this fight went to a decision. So I probably am going to bet on this fight not to go to a decision. I think the odds are pretty generous on that. If we look at Ferguson's record, it's been a bit of a mixed bag over the last few years whether fights have gone to a decision or not. But when you are struggling on the ground against someone like Bobby Green, Chiesa is a difficult proposition for you, and I know he's a bit of a decisionator himself, but you could also see he's got a lot of submissions on his record over the years, and I just think with the strength and physicality differential between these two, I just think Ferguson's just going to get mauled on the ground. So I quite like fight doesn't go to a decision. In terms of most likely outcomes for the props, I love Chiesa by submission. Unfortunately, the odds are dreadful, so I wouldn't go for that. It's pretty much the only prop I like, actually. The odds on Chiesa by decision aren't very good. I think most likely outcome is Chiesa by decision. I think he will just overwhelm Ferguson on the ground. I don't think Ferguson's going to be able to defend himself. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Elvis Brener versus Joe Alvarez. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Joe Alvarez is the favourite at average odds of around, it's quite a big odds spread. We will call it 1.52, which is going to be minus 192 for an implied probability of 66%. We take a look at the odds on his opponent, Brener. He's around an average of, say, 2.60, which is going to be plus 160 for an implied probability of 38%. So Alvarez is 31 years old, 6'3" with a 77-inch reach. Brener, 26 years old, 5'10" with a 72-inch reach. So both guys, I guess, around the same age, nothing too meaningful going on there. And we can see that Brener is a lot shorter than Alvarez, and Alvarez also has a very, very nice 5-inch reach advantage. Now, to be fair to Alvarez, he doesn't do a particularly good job of using this reach because he's so aggressive, and because he's so aggressive, he's always getting really close to you and striking in close proximity. But he's a decent striker. He's mean, he's nasty, he's aggressive on the feet, and it's better to have a 5-inch reach advantage than not to have a 5-inch reach advantage. I just want to point out that he's not one of these fighters that fights very long, like a Sandhagen, for example. Though Sandhagen gets inside a lot as well, but you know what I mean. Sandhagen's good at chipping away from distance as well. Alvarez, not so much. So Alvarez will have a decent size advantage over Brener, but obviously there's downsides to Alvarez's body type, because guys with Alvarez's body type tend to be pretty weak off their back, and Alvarez is no different. For some strange reason, guys that are abnormally long and tall for the division, which Alvarez is at 6'3" for the lightweight division, for some reason they just tend to be very weak off their back. But what is strange about Alvarez is there's no real need for him to be weak off his back. Usually when abnormally long and tall guys are weak off their back, it's usually because they've got skinny legs and they're weak in their lower body, which was the issue with Leon Edwards last week. We see it with guys like Chidi Njokuani, for example. You know, when guys are very weak in the lower body, for some strange reason, they just don't have very good balance. But that's not really the case with Alvarez. Even though he's long and tall at 6'3", he's quite filled out. He's quite solid. I'm not necessarily going to say he's thick. He's not like fucking Hector Lombard, obviously, but he is quite a, you know, a strong fighter. He doesn't appear to be that weak in the lower body. And also, he's got a very active guard. He's constantly attacking with submissions off his back. So I don't understand why he doesn't make more of an effort to get back up to his feet. I'm guessing it's because his grappling base is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and like Marlon Vera, he likes to fuck around on the ground, you know, throwing up long shot triangles, armbar attempts, all that kind of shit. And you know, at the end of the day, every once in a while you'll catch something, right? You will catch him. You'll catch people off their back with chokes and all kinds of shit. But that doesn't mean it's a particularly smart thing to do, to lie on your back and you know, just accept being there. 9 times out of 10 when you're on your back in MMA, it's a losing position. And you know, at the moment we see Alvarez racking up loads of submission wins against lower level fighters, but what happens as soon as he faces that step up in competition and faces solid MMA grapplers, guys like Damir Ismagulov and Arman Sarukian, what happens? He loses. You know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that his 2 losses in his UFC career against 2 guys who are amazing MMA grapplers that could basically shoot or shut all his shit down from top position. you're not catching guys like Ismagulov and Tsarukyan in long shot arm bars and triangles. But the good news for the good news for Joel Alvarez is Elvis Brener is the exact kind of guy that maybe he does catch with a Hail Mary submission off his back. And if people bet Alvarez at an implied probability of just 67% or in that 67, 65, 67% range, if they do bet on Mr. Alvarez and he does submit Brener off his back, they'll think they're absolute geniuses and really smart for betting him in this odds range, when personally I would look at this odds range and I would consider a guy like Alvarez to be way too steep of a favourite when he has such a big weakness in his skill set. But obviously when you look at Elvis Brener, obviously he doesn't really compare to the level of MMA grappler that Ismagulov and Tsarukyan is. He is far more in the Danilo, Belluardo, and I mean, Alexander Yakovlev's a decent grappler, to be fair. There's not too many other good examples there, because Thiago Moises, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Yakovlev, decent MMA grappler, trained at ATT for a long time. And, well, Mark Diakiese, even though he's British, and, you know, as we saw with Edwards last week, British fighters not the best on the ground usually, as a general rule, general trend. I can say that. I'm from this country. I'm from the UK. But Diakiese's not a bad MMA grappler. And Alvarez is putting away guys like Moises and Diakiese. Although, to be fair, this was a knockout, so it doesn't really count in the same way. But yeah, Brener, obviously, you know, on the ground, is going to be the kind of guy that will fall into a mad triangle or armbar or something like that. But to be fair, in Brener's defense, he does train at Shuto Box, and Shuto Box fighters do have a reputation for being incredibly difficult to submit on the ground. So be interesting to see what happens if these two mix it up on the ground. When it comes to grappling, this is one of those fights where there is no doubt that Joel Alvarez is the more skilled, technical grappler. And if these two guys were to meet each other in an if these two guys were to run into each other in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, Alvarez would almost certainly win. He's very tricky on the ground. But this isn't a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition. This is a cage fight to the death until the referee steps in and stops the fight or the time limit is up. And in a cage fight to the death, I wouldn't be so sure that Alvarez will have it all his own way on the ground, simply because even though he is a much more technically skilled grappler than Brener, Alvarez spends so much of his time on the ground, on the bottom. And as we've said many, many, many times over the years, 9 times out of 10 in MMA, if you're on the bottom, you're in a losing position. I think there was actually an exception to that rule. I think we had the 1 in 10 type of situation last week where a fighter actually did win a round when they spent a big chunk of it on the bottom. I think Sean O'Bannon spent a decent chunk of that first round on the bottom, and I think 2 of the 3 judges gave her round 1. That's one of the exceptions. A rule that 1 out of 10 times of being on the bottom can result in you still winning the round. But generally speaking, if you're on the bottom, you're losing, so you should try not to be there. But Alvarez, of course, loves to play off his back with the triangles, the arm bars, all that shit. So yeah, even though Brener's not as good as him on the ground, ultimately if Brener's on top position, he could be scoring points. He could win the grappling exchanges, especially if he's skilled enough to shut Alvarez's submission attempts down in the same way that Tsarukyan and Ismagulov could. And I wouldn't rule it out, because Shuto Box guys are tough as fucking nails, to be honest. And we've seen Brener in some wars in the UFC so far, so we know he's a tough fucker too. His fight against Guram Kutateladze was an absolute war, and his fight against Mikdebek Oralbai was no picnic either. So, like most guys that come out of Shuto Box, Brener is a tough fucker. Now, if the fight stays standing, you know what? The way these two match up is not all that different from the way they match up on the ground. So Alvarez is a lot more technical. He's a lot more dangerous. He's got true legit knockout power in every limit in his body. He's a very unorthodox, aggressive striker that is technical, but at the same time difficult to read, because he just throws everything at you. Spinning elbows, flying knees, big kicks, big combinations. Alvarez is mean, nasty, violent. We were talking about Cory Sandhagen as being a violent fighter, right? Some guys have knockout power and some guys are dangerous strikers, but you don't get many guys in the UFC that you can just say, that fucking guy is violent. And when you see him fight, he really hurts people. When you look at what Cory did to Yadong Song, when you look at the damage that he inflicted on TJ Dillashaw, when you look at his knockouts of Frankie Edgar, Marlon Vera, Sandhagen is certified violence. And Joel Alvarez kind of the same, to be fair to you. He's vicious on the feet. He's just evil. And so, with the kind of fighter that Elvis Brener is, I know that he knocked out Kenan Krzyzewski, but he is more of a volume striker. He doesn't have too much power in his hands. He basically stopped Kutateladze with volume, just wore him down to the point where Kutateladze had enough in that third round. But he's not really that dangerous of a striker, more of a volume striker. So it's not that likely that Brener is going to be able to knock Alvarez out. And Brener doesn't really try to take guys down either. So if this fight stays standing, Alvarez is going to inflict a lot of damage and he will hurt Brener. And I wouldn't rule out him knocking Brener out. But what I would say, like a lot of Shuto box fighters, you know, think of all the Shuto box warriors we've had over the years. Maurizio Shogun Rua. You got Vanderlei Silva, Anderson Silva, fucking even guys like Thomas Almeida, Jennifer Maia. What do we notice about all these guys? What is the number one trend that is present amongst almost all Shuto box fighters that have ever existed? They're fucking tough. They're tough fuckers. They love a scrap. They don't mind going to war. They're the type of guys you have to practically kill in order to finish. And if you look at Brener's record, you could really see that. Because he ain't ever been finished. Brener has never been finished before. The guy is an absolute dog. He's an absolute warrior. He was covered in blood in the Kutateladze fight and found a way to dig deep and get a win when he was... Good chance he was down on the scorecards. He's just a dog. He's a warrior. He never stops coming forward. No matter how hurt or no matter how tired he is, he's always trying to stay in the fight. Has an incredibly strong will to win. And while he's not the most skilled fighter, he doesn't have the best defense. He's not the most dangerous. He's not the most athletic. He's not the most technical. Fighting is 90% mental. And it's not always about fight IQ, strategy, game planning, decision making. In a cage fight to the death, sometimes it's about being a tough fucker. And when it comes to being a tough fucker, that's Alvarez's number one attribute. He is a tough fucker. Now don't get me wrong, Alvarez is a tough fucker as well. When you put two tough fuckers in the octagon with one another, you often get a great fight. And I could see this being a war and a very interesting fight, a back and forth matchup where both guys have their moments. I'm looking forward to it. I do think Brener can make this one interesting because Alvarez loves to stand and bang and he loves to fuck about on the ground, playing with his foot and fucking trying to trap you between his fucking legs so you can sniff his crotch in those triangles on the ground. And because of that, it's an interesting fight. So, you know, Alvarez the more dangerous striker, the more dangerous grappler. I definitely favour him here, but you would quite literally have to have a brain impediment to bet someone in this odds range that is as weak off his back as Mr. Alvarez is. Odds ranges such as this should be reserved for bets that you're very, 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 very confident in. And in a mixed martial arts contest, you can't really be confident in anyone that likes to lay on their back reading bedtime stories for much of a 15-minute fight. So I would avoid Alvarez anytime he's in this odds range until he tightens up that weakness in his game and starts to show a bit more urgency to pop back up to his feet after he's been taken down. So if we look at the over-under on this one, let's take a look. So the over 1.5 rounds is set at around 1.54, and the main over on this fight is fight to go or not to go to a decision. So it's about 1.49 not to go to a decision. Minus 204 for implied probability is 67%. I actually think this fight is more likely to go to a decision. Odds are 2.50 plus 150. That definitely gives you the better risk to reward ratio. You get you know, a much better deal in those odds. But the reason why I feel there's a pretty good chance this goes the distance is because both guys are tough fuckers. They are both very, 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 very tough fuckers, right? They're very, very, very tough fuckers. And because of that, I think this fight is very, very likely to go to a decision. However, in a betting context, I'm just going to bring something up for you now. Just going to load the page before I bring it over. So in a betting context, we bring this over here. So if we look at our pre-fight betting page, obviously we perform phenomenally well on over-unders. It is an absolute cash cow for us. An absolute cash cow for us. So if you look at our over-unders, we're kind of 50-50 on the last sort of 10. But before that, we were printing, right? We went 10-0 there. We went... can you even see this? Let me just bring the monitor up. Let me bring this back. So yeah, we went 10-0 there. We went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-2 there. We went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-4 there. So our record on these over-unders, pretty damn good. How did we do before that? Let's look at the last 50. We went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 4 there. How about before that? We went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 3 there, right? So we do pretty damn good on over-unders. They are an absolute cash cow for us. So we really need to have a think about this, because these odds on the fight goes to a decision are pretty generous. The reason why I think the fight will go to a decision is because both of them are tough fuckers and they're both well-rounded. They could both handle themselves standing up and on the ground. And we've both seen them take an ungodly amount of damage in fights and hang in there. Now, you guys know we performed really well on pre-fight bets. Over the last 2 years, we've consistently grinded out, pre-fight betting profits most months. We've done really well. And one of the ways we're able to do that is by sticking to rigid principles that enable us to stay out of trouble. Principles like not betting Bobby Green last week. When you research the fight between Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett, you can see it's a great fight for Bobby Green. But what do we know about guys that are Bobby Green's age? We know that old guys find ways to lose, and we know ever since we stopped betting guys that were over the age of like 35, 36 years old, we've done exponentially better because of it. So when we research a fight between a guy like Paddy and Bobby, even though we heavily lean towards Bobby and it's a great stylistic matchup for him, we know he's very likely to find a way to lose because of his age, and he's fighting a young, hungry, up-and-coming bull in Paddy. So these kind of principles help us stay out of trouble. And we've also got a lot of principles for our over-under bets, which enable us to perform so well on them. And one of the main principles that I like to stick to when it comes to over-under bets is I look to bet on fights where there isn't going to be a whole lot of violence if I can help it. Now, no, actually, if I do help it, I actually do help it. You won't catch me betting on fights where there's going to be a lot of violence. You just won't see me do it. Now, unfortunately, MMA is a crazy, chaotic sport. It's a cage fight to the death. If you wanted fucking safety and security here, you've come to the wrong place, because it's a cage fight to the death. You're not going to get safety and security and everybody playing nice in the fucking UFC. It's a cage fight to the death. Man up. Unpredictable shit is going to happen just the way it is. No one's got a crystal ball. So you will get situations when we bet over-unders, like Jong Young Lee versus Haider Amil, for example, where I wouldn't expect to lose this bet, because I wouldn't have expected there to be as much violence as there was when Haider Amil uncorked the fucking 40-strike combination on Lee's nose. I wouldn't have expected that to happen. It's going to happen from time to time. We can't be pussies about it. If we want to bet on sports, we can't be pussies. It's a proven scientific fact that pussies fail when it comes to sports betting. Scared money doesn't make money, right? We've just got to accept unpredictable shit happens. So a principle of mine is not to bet on over-unders, or sorry, that is incorrect. My principle is to not bet on overs in fights where there's likely to be a lot of violence. If there's a fight that there's likely to be a lot of violence, I want to be scouting the under at decent odds, because a lot of violence increases the probability of a finish. But when you get two guys like this and you've got the fight to go to a decision odds at underdog odds, it's tempting. because on the ground, Alvarez does have a good submission game. He's very dangerous. But these shooto box guys are usually so good at defending themselves on the ground that I promise you, if the trends are anything to go by, it will not be easy for Alvarez to submit Brener, even though he's a much higher level on the ground. And I know Alvarez is dangerous. And I don't give Brener much of a chance of submitting Alvarez on the ground because Brenner's not very good on the ground. And then if you look at the chances of this fight ending on the feet, I don't think they're that likely either, because Alvarez is a tough fucker and Brener doesn't have too much power in his hands. He's more of a volume striker. Yes, I guess he has 2 wins with strikes in his 3 fights, but trust me, he isn't that dangerous of a striker when you actually watch him with eyes and you don't just wiki cap. So Brenner's not that dangerous of a striker on the feet. Alvarez is a tough guy. We know he can take a lot of damage. Has Alvarez ever been knocked out? One time by head kick. This is obviously a TKO stoppage, ground and pounds. He hasn't been knocked out in a long time, in like 20 fights or something. And Brener, we've seen take an ungodly amount of damage and still keep going, and he's difficult to put away. So I think there's a reasonably good chance this goes to a decision. I'm not going to bet it because I'd have to break a principle, just like I would have had to have broken one of our principles to bet Bobby Green last week, and that was a good reminder to stick to the fucking principles, because when we break them we often get punished. So it was a good pass on Bobby last week. But look, if you really, really want to bet the over on this fight, even though these two boys will probably go to war and damn near kill each other and take years off each other's life, this will probably be a right scrap. They're both so durable and so well-rounded. I reckon we could get a 3-round war of attrition actually goes to a decision. And then if we look at the props, God, there's so many ways this fight could go. Alvarez by decision, I think, is the most likely outcome. Just by inflicting more damage, basically, and being more active standing up and on the ground. Or just, not active is perhaps not the right word, more effective on the ground. Because if a fight goes to the ground, you'd think Alvarez would be scoring points with submission attempts, and on the feet he's going to be doing more damage and landing the cleaner, more technical stuff. He's got better cardio out of the two as well, to be fair. Brener slows a bit, but he's still a fucking warhorse that digs deep and goes for it. He showed that in the Kuta Taladze fight. So most likely outcome, in my opinion, is Alvarez by decision, but I don't love the odds. But I do hope you found that breakdown video useful. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is one of the most interesting fights on this card, and it's still a fight I am giving a lot of consideration to. It is Mackenzie Dern versus Lupita Godinez. So I haven't fully made my mind up on this fight yet. I am very, very tempted to bet Mackenzie Dern, but I'm giving it a lot of thought. And so help me out with this one, guys. If you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment below. Let me know how you feel about this fight, how you feel about what I've said in this breakdown. And if you're a member of my community, please swing by the Discord and let me know what you think I should do, particularly those of you who are paid members, simply because we've bet a lot of Mackenzie Dern's fights in the past, and we've also live bet a lot of her fights. So a lot of us are very familiar with her strengths and weaknesses because we've watched her extremely closely. We're not kind of, you know, making assumptions or working from hazy memories. So in actual fact, do you know what? In actual fact, I think we've bet a lot of Godinez's fights as well. Let me just bring it up. I feel like we've bet both these girls. We are very, very familiar with them. Just going to take a look. Bring this page up. Let's take a look. So if we bring our betting tips page up, I'm pretty sure we've bet both these quite a few times. Yeah, so we've bet Lupita Godinez 3 times, and we've gone 3-0 betting on Lupita Godinez's fights. And then if we search for Mackenzie Dern, so we've gone 2-1 on Mackenzie Dern's fight. So actually what's interesting, we've bet Mackenzie Dern to win 3 times, and we've also bet Godinez to win 3 times. And overall, we're 5-1 when we bet these two girls. So I guess this is why I'm very tempted to bet this fight, because I feel like I have a really, really good read on both of these two. And as a result, I really want to pull the trigger. And that, like I say, if those of you that are paid members of my community, obviously you will have watched my analysis probably in a lot of depth for those 6 bets that I placed, where we've gone 5-1 on betting on these 2 girls. So you will have a very deep understanding and good level of knowledge on these 2 as well. And I know already this week, just today, a couple people talking about betting green. Taz is sorry, a couple of people are talking about betting Dern. Taz is betting Dern. Raffle was asking about it as well. So yeah, man, I'm tempted too, boys. Help me out with this one. I'm just gonna give you everything I got on this one, and then see how we feel about it, right? So start off with the odds. So Dern is the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.80, which is minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. And Godinez is the slight underdog at average odds of about, say, 2.02, which is going to be plus 102 for an implied probability of 50%. So Godinez is 30 years old, 5'2", with a 61-inch reach. And Dern is 31 years old, 5'4", with a 63-inch reach. So obviously we know by wingspan, Godinez is one of the smallest fighters in the division. So Dern will have a bit of a size and reach advantage over her. And she'll also have a decent advantage when it comes to power and physicality as well. And we'll talk about what that means for how these 2 match up when it comes to striking and grappling as we go along. So where do we even begin with this one? Okay, so both these girls are primarily grapplers, but I actually think this fight is quite likely to be decided on the feet. So we'll talk about how these 2 match up when it comes to grappling, and then we'll move on to striking. So I don't say this lightly, but I do think Mackenzie Dern is the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner to ever compete in the UFC. And I know that's a bold thing to say, because the wiki cappers will be like, oh yeah, but she sucks. She, you know, strode against Yan and Yan, and, you know, she got fucking knocked out by Jessica Andrade. And I looked on so-and-so's Wikipedia page, and they say they've got 146 BJJ trophies, and Dern's only got 142. I get it, whatever. You know, I'm sure there are, you know, on paper at least, much better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners than Dern. But I don't really give a fuck about, you know, how fighters look on paper, because in a cage fight to the death, it ain't going to be that helpful to throw paper airplanes at your opponent, right? You actually need violent skills, and Dern has violent skills. Her brand of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, her style of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, I think, the most violent I've ever seen in the UFC. She's just a force of nature on the ground, to the extent of a style of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that I just never really see, ever. And I can't actually think of another fighter ever in the UFC who has had the same combinations of skills on the ground that Dern has. Because when we consider Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, or we consider MMA grappler. Now, let's not talk about MMA grapplers. We're being very specific with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners here, because obviously Dern's MMA grappling, wrestling's not great. We're just talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. The reason why I consider Mackenzie Dern to be the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, pure BJJ practitioner, right? And I don't mean she's the best BJJ fighter ever in the UFC, where I'm comparing her to like a Charles Oliveira who's been a UFC champion. I don't mean that, because obviously Charles Oliveira's got different skills, such as striking, offensive wrestling, that have enabled him to become a champion. So I'm not saying Dern's the best BJJ fighter. I'm saying Mackenzie Dern's BJJ skills are the best I've ever seen in the UFC. So Charles Oliveira is a better fighter than Dern, but Dern is on a completely different level when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for mixed martial arts in the UFC. And the reason why I think Mackenzie Dern is the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner I've ever seen in the UFC with the application of BJJ is because there are no trade-offs or sacrifices with Dern, and that is extremely fucking rare. That is extremely fucking rare. Whenever you, in fact, it's rare to the point there's no one else like her. So when you look at other legendary Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters in the UFC, and we can really go through them, right? But I'm going to talk about their flaws. And then when we describe Mackenzie Dern on the ground, I'll show you she ain't got any. So let's start off with someone like Rani Yahya, right? Crushing physicality, amazing grappling control, you know, slick back takes, tricky submission game, but dreadful cardio, which holds him back. Demian Maia, again, crushing grappling control, very high level ground game, slick back takes. Once he's got you in a dominant position, you're cooked, the round is over. But again, Demian Maia, bad cardio. If you look at like a Fabrizio Verdum, slow, methodical Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? Strong, you know, crushing grappling control, slow, methodical, stage-by-stage Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he wasn't that dynamic on the ground. He wasn't that quick. You know, we could go on and on and on. We could name all these legendary fighters in the UFC with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We referenced Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira, some of the nastiest chokes in the history of the UFC. Very fast Jiu-Jitsu on the ground. You know, very, very slick on the ground. Dangerous submission game. But Charles Oliveira fades as fights wear on. So his Jiu-Jitsu is very dangerous early in a fight. But like Sarukian showed in one of their recent fights, if you can just weather that early storm from Oliveira, drag him into the second, third, fourth, fifth round, he turns into a bit of a pussycat and his ground game's not that dangerous. We saw that in his fight against Paul Felder, where Felder actually ended up stopping him on the ground because he weathered the early storm, and Oliveira kind of waved the white flag and gave up. So when you look at Mackenzie Dern, she is a phenom on the ground and a very, very unique fighter because she has extremely fast offensive jiu-jitsu, which in itself is quite rare in the UFC. You know, you get the odd guy pop up every once in a while, like Gilbert Burns has got quite fast jiu-jitsu. Chase Hooper's got quite fast jiu-jitsu. Charles Oliveira's got quite fast jiu-jitsu, whereas offense. But what you notice about these guys, and to be fair, Chase Hooper's an exception to this rule, but what you notice about Gilbert Burns and Charles Oliveira is the fast Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu takes a lot of energy. So when you're constantly attacking with submissions on the ground, guys like Gilbert Burns, Charles Oliveira burn themselves out, which is why they've both suffered from cardio issues throughout their whole career and they're not able to grapple as much as they would like. Dern's unique because she can spam takedowns for 15 minutes and literally she could throw the kitchen sink at you. She could attack you with 100 submissions in a 15-minute period. She'd barely break a sweat. She wouldn't even be breathing heavy by the end of it. Her cardio is unbelievable. So the pace at which she can fight on the ground is actually unparalleled. I don't think I've ever seen someone with the fast jiu-jitsu that Dern has, but the cardio to go with it. And then when you consider what MMA grappling is, we speak about this every week where we talk about there always being that trade-off where you have MMA grapplers and, you know, there are a few exceptions to the rule like Khabib. There are a few unicorns out there. There will always be outliers in any aspect of life. But for most mere mortals on Earth, there's always a trade-off. So you've either got to have great cardio where you can like relentlessly grapple and relentlessly spam takedowns, or you've got to have crushing physicality. But generally speaking, if you've got a very physically imposing ground game like an Andre Petroski, your cardio won't be very good. And then if you've got, you know, a relentless style of grappling that is backed by great cardio, typically speaking, your grappling control won't be particularly good. Like Merab Dvalishvili is a good example of that. Go check out his first round against Cejudo to see what I mean. But Mackenzie Dern, again, is very unique because she has crushing grappling control with fast jiu-jitsu and with great cardio, which is so rare. She's also great from top position, great from bottom position, and she understands the importance of position over submission. It is very rare that you'll see Dern attack with a submission on the ground and lose position. If you're in my live betting group, you'll hear me complain about this all the fucking time. We live bet Kurt Holloway a few weeks ago, right, against Krzyzewski, and in that third round where he obtained the body triangle on Krzyzewski, we were saying, hold, just keep him here, put this third round in the bank and we'll win this live bet. As luck happens, he did win for us. He got us over the line, made a nice profit, very cool. But he also lost position because he got overly aggressive on the ground. Mackenzie Dern is a fighter that never does that. It's so rare. She is one of the very few fighters that can attack with high-risk submissions. And by high-risk submissions, I mean submissions that she ain't particularly likely to get, but a high percentage of the time will result in her losing the position if she were a mere mortal. But she ain't a mere mortal, she's a fucking superhero, because she can attack with long shot submissions and still somehow, if the submission attempt fails, retain a dominant position, and often not the dominant position she started with when she attacked with a submission. So she's a phenomenal MMA grappler. She's fantastic to watch. I absolutely love her. She is brilliant, and she doesn't get enough credit for how high level of a fighter she is. She's a truly special fighter, and I've been watching the sport for 20 years. I've never seen Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the UFC like I see from Mackenzie Dern. She doesn't get the respect that she deserves, partly down to her own fault, right? I've said a lot of nice things about Mackenzie Dern, and now we've got to be a little bit critical, because at the end of the day, you know, there has to be issues here. I would have rushed out and bet a load of money on her already. And I'm hesitant, I'm reluctant for all the reasons I'm about to go into. So, if Dern does get Lupita Godinez to the ground, Godinez is fucking cooked. Just like everyone else in the division, she's fucking cooked. No one stands a chance on the ground with Mackenzie Dern. Let's just get that straight. If Dern gets you to the ground, not a lot you can do apart from try to survive. It's that simple. So on the ground, Godinez has no chance. Absolutely no chance. But the huge problem with Mackenzie Dern is that I feel, and this might go down as one of the biggest, like, mistakes, or this, Mackenzie Dern might go down as being the most mismanaged fighter in UFC history. Because with how good she is on the ground, with how tough she is, and with how amazing her cardio is, like, she's so durable. We've seen her take so much damage in fights, and it's not easy to get her out of there. She's so tough, she's so durable. You know, you look at the damage that she took in her fights against Jandiroba and Amanda Lemos, and she won't quit. She still keeps pushing. So she can take an ungodly amount of damage. She's got cardio for days. She's tough as nails. She's got a strong will to win. Crushing physicality to her ground game. She's got all these attributes. You know, the highest level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu I've ever seen in the UFC. So she's got the foundation and the base to be the greatest female fighter of all time. There's no doubt in my mind. She's like fucking Ronda 3.0. And again, people love to meme the fuck out of Ronda. No one was memeing Ronda when she was literally tossing the best female fighters on their head and ripping their arms off in 3 seconds. All the virgins love to come out now and bash Ronda and make fun of her. But at the end of the day, she was one of the most dominant champions in UFC history. I think she deserves more respect. And Dern has got an even higher level base than Ronda to build from. But Dern's career was incredibly mismanaged, because when she first came to the UFC, or actually came into MMA, she obviously was just a pure grappler, right? She was coming from this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. And because of that, she didn't have any striking. So at that point in Dern's career, she, you know, obviously made the decision to improve her striking. And she has improved her striking tremendously. Her striking has improved exponentially, and it continues to improve. But I think Dern made a really, really bad decision, because it's quite clear from how much she's improved her striking that she's put a lot of time, effort and energy into developing MMA striking. The problem is her wrestling is terrible. So she's in this situation where she's got the highest level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu I've ever seen in MMA. She's got below average striking. And then she's got this weird bit in the middle where she just is terrible. So it's like she can't connect the striking and her high level ground game because she doesn't have the wrestling in the middle to get her opponents to the ground. So then she's forced to strike a lot of the time. And because she's a below average striker, she struggles against the best fighters in the world, or the best fighters in the division, like your Amanda Lemoses or your Jessica Andrades, or even your Zhao and Yans. And that's a shame. I think the reason why Mackenzie Dern's career has been managed so badly is, I just think maybe her and her team didn't have a particularly good grasp of what she needed to become the best in the world. Because if you look at Ronda, right, when people finally figured her out, they figured her out because she couldn't get them to the ground anymore. Track me. Sorry, my camera's playing up. Ronda started to struggle in her career because people figured her out and she couldn't get them to the ground anymore. And so when she couldn't get them to the ground anymore and she was forced to stand and strike, her striking got exposed as not fucking having any. And I think Dern was in this position where she was kind of like, okay, I've got a really, really high level ground game. I'm very confident there. I don't need to work on that. So she kind of completely ignored developing her grappling and just went hard on improving her striking because she thought, well, when fights go to the ground, I'm going to fucking murk everyone in the division. So if I just focus on my striking, that's what will enable me to achieve my goals and become UFC champion. But by doing that, she completely neglected wrestling. And so even though she is the highest level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner I've ever seen in the UFC, she can't get fights to the ground. And it's not improving. You know, every single time we break down a Mackenzie Dern fight, you know, we say, but she might have improved their wrestling. And every time she goes out there and there's no improvement, it's fucking shocking. So her striking's improving a lot, and her ground game doesn't need to improve, but she can't fucking get the fights there. And for me, it's such a shame because I think she would have gone down as the greatest female fighter of all time if she would have just completely ignored striking and committed hard to learning MMA grappling and offensive wrestling. She would have been a fucking nightmare. Because she's tough enough to persistently grapple and she's got good enough cardio to persistently grapple. She would have just taken girls down and just ruined them on the ground. And you know, Damian Maia had this problem early in his UFC career. Rani Yahya had this problem earlier in his UFC career where, you know, when Rani Yahya and Damian Maia came into the UFC, you know, there were fights where those two struggled to use their grappling, right? You look at Damian Maia versus Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva's takedown defense later got exposed in the Chael Sonnen fight. But Damian Maia couldn't get him down. Damian Maia just got his face jabbed off for 25 minutes because he had no offensive wrestling. And then later in Damian Maia's career, he developed a very nice double leg takedown entry shot and worked his way into the title picture. It was a game changer when Damian Maia actually learned how to take guys down, but it took him many years and many UFC fights to get there. So I'm not giving up hope on Mackenzie Dern, but I think she just needs to ditch the striking now. Ditch working on the striking. You know, Jason Perillo's a great coach, but ultimately he's a striking coach. Ditch the fucking striking and develop some wrestling, because she's only 31, is not too late. And I think if she did develop a double leg takedown, a decent double leg, she could rise through the ranks and become the champion very quick. I think she beats every girl. I think she dominates everyone in this division if she develops decent offensive wrestling, but it's not there yet. And that's the problem we face with this fight, because Lupita Godinez at 5'2" has got that small, compact, muscular frame. That low center of gravity. She's athletic and she's got good balance. Her takedown defense is very good. Her sister is currently competing in the Olympics in wrestling, I believe, for Canada. You might want to fact check me on that. I just read it on a tweet, so it might not be true. But yeah, Godinez is a good MMA grappler in her own right. It's the reason why we've bet on her in 3 of her past fights, and we've won all 3 of those bets. A big part of the reason why we usually bet Godinez is because of her wrestling. And so with Godinez having good wrestling, having that good body type for defensive wrestling and takedown defense, she's going to be very difficult to take down. And Mackenzie Dern's method of takedowns at this point in her career is for the most part either judo throws, which tend to be pretty ineffective, especially against girls with good balance and a low center of gravity like Godinez. And then Dern's other method to get fights to the ground usually involves just initiating chaos. So she, just kind of comes forward very aggressively, looks to engage her opponents and just, find a situation where the fight goes to the ground in just a moment of chaos, really. She'll roll for legs, she'll pull guard, but she's generally ineffective at all that stuff. She's not good at it. She isn't good at getting fights to the ground, and that's why she's losing to these girls at the top of the division. She's losing to them. She's losing to the girls at the top of the division. There's no other way to dress it up. And so this is a tricky fight for me because I do think Mackenzie Dern is going to find it very, very, very difficult to get this fight to the ground. And so if this fight stays standing, I don't favour her. But I'm going to contradict myself now because I actually could see Mackenzie Dern winning a stand-up fight, which I know doesn't make any sense. But let me explain. So the reason why I am very, 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 very tempted to bet Mackenzie Dern in this fight is because we already know that if the fight goes to the ground, Godinez is cooked. She's got no chance. She will get dominated. She might be able to survive on the ground and make it to the end of the round, but she's in a lot of trouble. But we know also it will be difficult for Dern to get the fight to the ground unless she's significantly improved her takedown defense. So this is very likely to be a stand-up fight. And I actually give Dern a decent chance of winning a stand-up fight. And it is the first time I think I ever would have said that about Mackenzie Dern, because obviously I've been very critical of her striking. But this is actually the first fight I look at and I go, you know what? Dern's striking has improved so much that this might actually be the first fight where her striking gets her the win, which I know is a crazy thing to say. And the reason why I'm going to say it is because Dern is way more powerful and way more physically imposing than Godinez. So remember earlier on where I was saying Dern's ground game is very unique because she's a unicorn in the sense that she's got crushing physicality, power and strength on the ground, but she's also got, never-ending genetic cardio for days. Well, Godinez, unfortunately, isn't a unicorn, and she's not blessed with that. And so even though she's a decent MMA grappler, she's just lacks physicality. She doesn't have any power. She's very much a volume striker. She can't really hurt you. And so what is interesting about this fight, though, even though Mackenzie Dern has got an abundance of physicality to both her striking and ground game, because she has no wrestling, she can't use that physicality to get fights to the ground, which is insane. Because think about how good she would be if she could, power into takedowns like a fucking, Andre Petrosky, but not gas out. That's what Mackenzie Dern could be. That's what Mackenzie Dern could be, but she's not it, man. She's not it. She's got no wrestling. It's a shame. So anyways, back to this one. So where the physicality between these two gets real interesting is Godinez doesn't really hurt you on the feet or leave a lasting impression on the judges. Godinez is one of these fighters that struggles to put her stamp on rounds, which is why you can see she's been involved in 3 split decisions in the UFC and a majority decision. So whenever I see a fighter and on their record they're involved in a lot of split decisions, a lot of majority decisions, that says to me that they struggle to put their stamp on rounds, because if they did a better job of putting their stamp on rounds, the fight wouldn't be so difficult to score. And you can really see that with Godinez's fighting style, because on the feet she's a technical striker. She moves well, she throws a really good volume of strikes, she's very consistent on the feet, she's very well trained, she's decent defensively. From a technical point of view, there's nothing I can criticise Godinez for when it comes to striking. But she just doesn't have a particularly judge-pleasing style. Because even if she lands 30, 35 strikes in a round, she's not really inflicting any damage. She's not really causing her opponents any problems. She's just kind of touching them. And it doesn't really put her stamp on a round. She just isn't like... By calling her not effective seems inappropriate. Because she is effective, because she's very technical, but in the same way she's not effective because she doesn't really hurt people. And again, it's a cage fight to the death, which is a bit of a problem, right? She never hurts anyone on the feet, she just kind of touches them. And when you look at Mackenzie Dern, the wars that she has been in, the damage she's taken, knocked down in round 1 against Jessica Andrade, came back. Yes, she was finished in round 2, but she still took the shot initially. Knocked down bad in round 2 against Amanda Lemos, managed to survive, took an ungodly amount of damage, the fight went the distance, had her nose crushed in that second round against Werner Jandiroba, and was able to still grind out a win. In fact, I actually think we bet Dern in that fight. That was one of the winning bets we had on Dern. So she's one of these fighters that just tough as fucking nails. So Godinez ain't going to hurt her on the feet. She might outstrike her, she's not going to hurt her. But the thing about Mackenzie Dern is, even though she's a sloppy striker and she's not that technical, she does hit hard. She does hit hard. She damages girls. She has scored the odd knockdown and wobbled a couple girls because she throws everything into her shots when she throws them. She fully commits and she's fearless as well. She doesn't go into a defensive shell. If Amanda Lemos knocks her down, or if Werner Jandiroba breaks her nose, the next round, Dern's still coming forward, getting in their face. She's utterly fearless. And she's an absolute dog on the feet, and she hits hard. She commits everything to everything that she throws. She's got heavy leg kicks and heavy power in her hands. Now, look, whenever I break these fights down, there are always these jabron-tards who will take me out of context. I have people on the YouTube comments like, oh my god, this guy called Dern powerful, he's so clueless. Whenever I break down fights, I'm always talking within the context of the matchup I'm breaking down, right? So when I say Dern's got power, I'm not fucking comparing her to Weili Zhang or Amanda Lemos, okay? I do have eyeballs and I do have a brain. I'm not fucking stupid. I spend a lot of time at this. But when I say Dern's got power, in the context of this matchup, she really does. Because Godinez is pillow-fisted and can't hurt you on the feet. Mackenzie Dern actually can. So in the context of this matchup, Dern is more powerful than Godinez. She can hurt her more on the feet. She does have more pop in her shots, more power, more impactfulness on everything that she does. So this is a situation where you have the volume of Godinez, the volume and the technique of Godinez on the feet, and the power, the damage, the impactfulness of Dern's shots. And in that kind of fight, it can kind of go either way. And that's why I said I wouldn't rule out the possibility of Dern winning the fight on the feet. Because if Godinez just kind of chips away at her with 30 jabs and leg kicks that don't really hurt Dern and don't really damage her, but then Dern busts Godinez up a bit, you know, cuts her, maybe lands a shot that gets a reaction from the crowd, Dern can nick rounds on the feet. You know, if this fight stays standing, you know, don't assume Godinez is going to win this comfortably. I don't think she will. So what does all this mean from a betting point of view? We've just said so much and we've got to summarize this now. So the problem I have with betting Dern this weekend is that I think there's a pretty good chance that this fight will stay standing. And if it stays standing, I lean like 55-45, 60-40 in favor of Godinez, which is a problem. Because if you look at the odds on Mackenzie Dern, they carry an implied probability of 55%, right? So if I lean 55-45, 60-40 Godinez in a stand-up fight, and I think this fight's going to stay standing, and Mackenzie Dern's odds are, you know, an implied probability of 55%, then Dern is a bad bet, because how I'm predicting this fight will go is exactly where the odds are, therefore there is no value in the odds. But I've got to think about a couple more things. Dern does have a huge advantage on the ground. Dern could submit Godinez. It is pretty much impossible. It's close to impossible that Godinez would submit Dern. I would give it like a less than 2 or 3% chance of happening. Dern could knock Godinez down on the feet and hurt her bad on the feet. Even though Dern's got a habit of getting dropped and being pretty bad defensively, I don't think Godinez really has the power to hurt Dern on the feet. I'd be surprised. So there are other factors that I need to factor into the Dern bet, even though I do think it is likely to stay standing. So I'm really conflicted with this one because I'm very, very tempted to bet on Mackenzie Dern. Very, very tempted to bet on Mackenzie Dern. So where am I at the moment? Like I say, I would really appreciate if you guys would help me out on Discord or the YouTube comments with whether I should bet this fight, because I'm going to tell you where I'm currently at based on everything that I've said, and then I just need to think about it, right? So look, I'm at that stage in my career where I look at fights and betting opportunities such as this, and I know I'm putting my money in danger, right? A good amount of danger for two reasons. The first reason being, I think this is going to be a very, very competitive fight. Like I say, it's going to be hard for Dern to get the fight to the ground, and if it stays standing, I think it'll be razor close. So if I bet Dern this weekend, sure, she may hit a Hail Mary submission. You know, she may improve a lot. Godinez may not have her best performance and struggle. There are some unlikely ways in which this could be a comfortable fight for Dern, but most likely outcome, I think a high percentage of the time, I think this fight is going to be very close and very competitive. I don't think Dern's going to have it easy here. I think if she wins, this is going to be a sweat, a close fight. And so, with that in mind, we also know that the judges in Abu Dhabi are a corrupt, brown envelope opening bunch of fucking just wastes of oxygen, right? Judging in the UFC is already fucking bad, but when you get these cards in Abu Dhabi, it's even fucking worse. The judging is an utter joke. So I'm in a situation where, when I researched this fight, based on my research, I acknowledge this is probably going to be a razor close fight that could go either way, right? There's no doubt, you know, there's a lot of reasons to like Dern in this fight, and her odds are attractive, and I do really want to bet Dern. I do lean towards Dern for sure, no doubt, strong lean. But I look at this and I go, is this going to be an easy fight for Dern? Is she going to win easily? The answer is no, it's unlikely. So then I'm thinking to myself, if I acknowledge this is likely to be a razor close fight, and I lean a decent amount towards Dern, what are the odds that even if Dern wins, the judges are even going to fucking score the fight correctly? Or are they going to be too busy checking out the girls' asses instead of paying attention to actually what's happening? Because some of the fucking scorecards we see in the UFC, there's got to be some explanation for what they're doing. Maybe they're just checking the fighters' dicks out or something, or in this case, booties. I don't know what's going on. Could be brown envelopes, could be blindness, it could be distracted by the anatomy of the fighters. I'm not sure what it is. It's fucking something, especially on cards in this part of the world. But when I look at this fight, I'm like, if the odds on Mackenzie Dern carry an implied probability of 56%, and I acknowledge it's probably going to be a very close fight, and I acknowledge that the judges are a waste of oxygen who are corrupt and being paid off by somebody to score fights incorrectly, do I really want to put my money in that much danger? Do I really need to gamble? Not really. I don't really need to gamble. I'm at that stage in my career where, look, we've had a bit of a dip on live betting recently, but at the end of the day, look at this chart. This is the most beautiful chart you're ever going to see in the history of fucking sports betting. We know that after this dip, same as when we've had all these other flat periods in the past, this profit chart is just going to keep on keeping on. It's going to keep trending up, man, inevitably. This is our bread and butter. We do amazing. Look, you have a little dip here. Nice few consecutive months of wins, little dip here and boom, pretty soon we're going to fucking carry on, take the next leg up, keep printing profits, right? That's the way this story always goes. That's the way the story always has gone. Nothing can stop us. So we know if we're patient, we're going to get real strong positions for us to put our money in live betting on the UFC, and we're going to print profits. And print profits on positions we can get our money into, which are a lot safer than Mackenzie Dern. And on top of that, the new football season starts this week. And as you guys know, they're in my football betting group. The vast majority of my bets on football are all in the even money odds range. Almost every bet that we place is in the similar odds range to Mackenzie Dern this weekend. And I know over the next month, if I'm patient, I am going to get probably at least 10 to 15 opportunities to bet things on football in a similar odds range to Mackenzie Dern that are significantly less risky than betting Mackenzie Dern this weekend. Way better risk to reward ratios with the same odds with football. Like if you look at our profitability chart from last season, we got absolutely destroyed in May, but it was an anomaly. It was a strange month, and we had a ton of games to bet in that month with a different game dynamic that you don't get at any other time of the year. Tournament finals, deep stage tournament games, high stake end of season league games, playoff games. These are the type of matches you don't get throughout the rest of the year in football. So my betting strategies weren't as effective on those types of games. But if you take May out of our results for last season, look at this. We literally printed money all season. Track me. We literally printed money all season. We made a profit on 10 of the 12 months during last football season. We got destroyed in May. There's no way to fucking dress it up. It was real fucking bad. My biggest financial loss of all time. But there's a fucking reason for it. There's a fucking reason for it. There's a fucking reason for it. So when we come back next year, that's not going to happen. So I know I'm going to print money all next season on football. I know I'm going to print money until the end of time on UFC live betting. And so when I look at bets like Mackenzie Dern, I want to bet her so bad and I lean so strongly towards her. But I know I am putting my money in a lot of danger. And if this were a fair and honest world, where the MMA judges did their job and scored fights fairly, accurately and correctly, instead of taking brown envelopes from someone, then I would 100% bet Mackenzie Dern this weekend. But I just know this is going to be a close fight. And I don't want to be in a situation where I've researched this fight and I've identified it'll be close. But Mackenzie Dern does what I expect her to do and edges Godinez. And then I'm sat there waiting for the fucking decision to be read out. And the three fucking corrupt dickheads sat cage side. They've got no integrity, no morality, you know, write down a bunch of random numbers on the fucking scorecards and who fucking knows how they'll score the fight. Because if this is a close fight, all scorecards are possible, right? One judge will have it 30-27 Godinez, one will have it 30-27 Dern, another judge will have it fucking 29-28 Godinez, and Dern probably fucking win every round and lose a split decision. That's how the state of this sport at the moment. And I just don't know if I want to put my money in that much danger and expose it to that much risk. Now, it really depends where you're at in your betting career, right? The stage of life you're in, what your goals are. If if your bread and butter is live bet, if your bread and butter is pre-fight betting on the UFC, and you place a decent volume of pre-fight bets, and you don't really care too much about the judging and stuff, you're just going to look for reasonably good betting opportunities and you're going to go with them, and you're not particularly into live betting, you're not particularly into other sports. If pre-fight UFC betting is your thing and your only thing and your sole thing, and you don't mind putting your money in a bit of danger, I would probably say bet Mackenzie Dern this weekend. I would say probably bet Mackenzie Dern, because what I will say is Dern can do terrible things to Godinez. She can destroy her on the ground. She can choke her unconscious. She can rip a limb off. She can inflict damage on the feet with big shots. There's not really much Godinez can do to trouble Dern. She's not going to cause her any problem on the ground. She's not really going to hurt her very much on the feet. So, for that reason, you should take Dern. But I just feel like with fights like this, I'm not always too sure how useful research is, because I know that this fight is likely to be so close and so competitive that if it does go to a decision, any fucking scorecard is possible. And that's the sad state of the sport we're in. So at the moment, my approach to pre-fight betting is obviously snipe those over-under bets, because then the judges don't get involved in whether we win or lose. And obviously our record on over-unders is really, really good. We perform great on them. We spoke about that, you know, earlier in the video. And then my philosophy for moneyline bets is quite simple. I look for situations where I can overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour by betting on fighters that have virtually no way to lose, or very, very minimal risk factors, where something really unpredictable needs to happen in order for them to lose. And of course, unpredictable things will happen. It's a cage fight to the death. It's just the way it is. But I want an incredible risk to reward ratio for my money, because if I'm going to be putting it in a lot of danger with the uncertainty around judging and the chaos of MMA, I want to make sure I'm getting a good deal in the fucking odds. And with Mackenzie Dern's implied probability floating around 56%, I question how good of a deal this bet is, when I do think this fight will be razor close and competitive. So I'm having trouble with this one, but I might still bet Dern. It might get to Saturday and I might think fuck it, and I might just bet her anyway. Like if we hit some football bets, you know, tomorrow, Saturday, then I might just be like, fuck it, you know, I've made a decent profit. I'm gonna chuck a bit on Dern and see how it goes. And if I do that, obviously I'll let you guys know in Discord. But for those of you watching on YouTube that aren't a member of my community, you know how I feel about this now. So ultimately, you don't need me to tell you what to do. I wouldn't expect any of the members in my community to now, you know, not bet Dern at the moment, but then go and bet Dern if I say I'm betting Dern on Saturday. Any of my paid members, I wouldn't expect them to do that, because nothing's going to change. You know, ultimately I share all my bets with guys in my community, but like, I'm not going to like not share. What I'm trying to say is, right, I'm not going to change how I feel about this fight between now and Saturday. So you've got all my thoughts and feelings on this matchup, right? There's nothing that's going to change my mind on this fight, unless one of them has a bad weight cut or news breaks or one of them looks injured. There's nothing going to change my mind. So if I bet Dern on Saturday, it's because I want to bet her, because I might have made, some money on football Friday night, Saturday, or I might just be feeling like, fuck it, maybe I'm being a pussy, maybe I should just pull the trigger here and stop being a bitch. But that would be the reason why I would bet Dern. It wouldn't be because I feel any differently about it. So whether you're a member of my community or not, it doesn't really matter. You've got all the information now in terms of how I feel about this fight for you to make your own mind up. I guess what I would like is for you, either in the YouTube comments or on my Discord, to let me know how you feel about this fight, because it may help me come to the correct decision, in terms of maybe you guys can help me see if I am being too picky or too much of a bitch or too much of a pussy over this fight. Or maybe you're like, no Chris, actually Dern does struggle to get her opponents to the ground. Her wrestling is shit. You know, her implied probability is 55%. You're correct to pass here, because even if she does win, it likely will be close, which means there's no value in her odds. I'd really be keen to see what you guys think. And that is a complex fight. So let's take a look at the over-under on this one. Let's take a look at the over-under. Okay, so pretty good chance the fight goes to a decision. Obviously, both are tough, both are well-rounded. I don't think Godinez has ever been finished. She is not. Obviously, she's also never faced someone on the ground like Dern. Because I think it will be difficult for Dern to get the fight to the ground, this fight's very likely to go to a decision. But if Dern was able to get the fight to the ground in you know, with a good amount of time to work, I think she'd very likely submit Godinez actually and hand her first loss inside the distance. But that's not the most likely outcome. So it is more likely the fight goes to decision, but I don't love the odds. In terms of the props, Dern by decision is the only one I would be interested in. The odds aren't great. The odds aren't great. But if you're looking to bet a prop on this fight, Dern by decision I think is probably the most likely outcome. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. You probably didn't, because I just rambled on for a very long time trying to just think out loud. Hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for watching. If you like these breakdown videos and you want to watch breakdown videos for all the other fights on this card, don't forget MMABettingTips.com. On there I post breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card that you can use as strategy guides, or you can gain access to all my bets. When I do place bets, you can gain access to them. And so that's over on MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. Love you all. We'll be back next week with another breakdown video for another very good card. Hopefully the judges behave themselves this weekend, because they're pissing me off. Nice one, guys. Take care. Love you all. See you next week. Bye.